her video and mic working.
Excellent.
Okay, here, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for the help.
Welcome, Councillor Ney. It's always nice to have things work.
Yep.
Everybody looks and sounds clear on my end, so that's always a good sign. So it's 7:02. I'm going to call the meeting to order. When I do so, I'm just going to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish people, specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, and that their historic connections continue to this day. Up first, we just have approval of the agenda for March 22nd. I moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Item 3 is just adoption of the regular council meeting minutes. And this we have just March 8th to be adopted. We have a mover.
Well, I'd be fine to second, but I do have a correction.
Yep, no worries. So it's moved and seconded. This is a chance to make any corrections or additions, changes. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much. On page, oh gosh, there's no page numbers. On the last page, in new business, with respect to the notice of motion put forward, I believe it was Councillor Green that put forward, not Councillor Ney. Top of the last page.
And I'll just let Councillor Green and Councillor Ney have a look at that to make sure that correction is indeed correct.
I'm sorry, we're talking about March the 8th. I'm sorry.
Yes, March the 8th, the minutes of March the 8th.
Yes, thank you.
That's a good catch, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So with that change, any other changes on the minutes? Not seeing any then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Those are captured. We have a number of Horizon reports here. In talking to staff, we normally read aloud into the record all of the notices, all of the Horizon reports. There's just an awful lot here. So I'm just going to give a very quick verbal, and people who are interested in looking at them can go ahead and do that. But just some staffing changes on January 18th. Just the council priorities and risks measurements initiatives on January 25th, salary increases for exempt staff February 1st, and a process for evaluating those costs. That same meeting, a number of members of the community were appointed to the Public Arts Advisory Committee. A direction was given for the Arts Laureate process. And we agreed to continue to advertise for the 2 open positions on the Public Arts Advisory Committee. Also, the Board of Variance was appointed, as was the Advisory Planning Commission and the Design Commission, Design Panel, and Advisory Planning Commission. On March 8th, again, 2 more people were appointed to the Public Art Advisory Committee, and the Heritage Commission was also fully appointed in that date. So there's no motion required, but that's what happened on those Horizon reports, and all of those details are there. This is for those watching who used to watch our council meetings. We never had a formal place for our Horizon reports to happen, and what we found was that they were not always timely or even always getting out. They just were no longer relevant. They just kind of disappeared. And this is really intended to create a much more transparent process when things are dealt with in camera for them to come out again. With that, we did not have a committee of the whole meeting last week. And so we've just amended our agenda today to allow time for councillors to give updates on their other committees and commissions that they sit on. So this is an opportunity now at this point where the mayor's remarks normally sit. I don't have much in the way of mayor's remarks, so I'm happy to let the verbal reports from councillors take place first. And I'm going to go largely in the order on my screen here, just so I capture anybody. But Councillor Paterson, with your hand up, you happen to be top left of my screen, so why don't you go first?
Thank you, Mayor. And an item I just wanted to report on, it seems like a long time ago now, but I am liaison to Victoria Family Services or Family Court Youth Services. And one item did come back to us, a response from the province This is a response that was also made by the District of Oak Bay, a letter sent by yourself, Mayor, to implore the province to provide consistent and stabilized funding for the Victoria Sexual Assault Center. And that was a while ago now, but I am pleased to say that we have been informed by the province that a one-time grant has been provided to Victoria Sexual Assault Center it goes through to the end of 2021. The amount was, I think, $200,000. And also we have confirmation from the province that the province has increased their annual budget by $8 million to meet ongoing demand for services of outreach and crisis support for women and children who experience domestic violence. So I just thought I would update the members of our council who we had discussion on council because the District of Oak Bay does fund the Victoria Sexual Assault Clinic. And so I thought everyone would be pleased to hear that there has been a positive outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Paterson. I have next Councillor Green, then Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Braithwaite on my screen. So we'll go there. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. We had a tourism committee meeting on March the 4th, and Councillor Braithwaite and I both attended. And generally things are going well with the committee. The vacancy for a secretarial position is still open, and we're hoping that we can recruit a member from the BIA to bring that relationship closer together. There were updates on the hotel industry. It's a tough time right now. I believe the province in April will be making future announcements on the ability of hotels to host meetings and events, but at the moment, none of those can go ahead. Destination Greater Victoria is supporting local businesses. There is a Visa gift card campaign rolling out, I believe. And then there is a Stay and Play campaign, which is on hold now, but funds will have to be used by local staycations in the near future. So it remains a tough time for the tourism sector, certainly. And the Tourism Committee has also provided feedback to the future of Turkey Head, as you know. And I think if Councillor Braithwaite has anything to add, I would be appreciative. And the last thing is that Mr. Cowden will be reaching out to you, Mayor Murdoch, to rebook a meeting that was planned a few weeks back. And he will do that. I just talked to him tonight online, and he's here, of course, tonight. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. Councillor Zelka, then Braithwaite, then Nay, then Appleton. That's how I have it here.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just wanted to share a few words about as liaison to the emergency program, the Oak Bay Emergency Program. There was a presentation at the last meeting from Sarah Hunn, who was chair of the REMP Public Education Committee. REMP, of course, is the CRD Regional Emergency Management Partnership. And it was the new tsunami maps have been released. So we reviewed the inundation zones, and particularly for the Oak Bay area, and for plans going forward in terms of what things that needed to be updated and work that had to be put in place to make sure that we were well protected. So it was a very excellent presentation by Sarah Hunn. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I just have two things. The first is that AVICC, just a reminder that the AVICC AGM is only going to be one day this year, and it will be online, and that will be on Friday, May 28th. So perhaps council can put that in their calendars, or I can ask staff to send out a little hold the date for that. And thank you to Councillor Green for getting her resolution in. It is being looked at AVICC, so thank you for that. Also, I'm working on trying to get some semblance of the Yes Awards together for this year. I'm not sure how that's going to look, but Councillor Appleton and I will have a little meeting and see what we can figure out, and if we can get something to happen perhaps in May or something like that. Obviously it won't look like what it has in the past, but I'd still like to celebrate the wonderful youth in our community at some point in time before school's out. So that's it.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Nay.
I don't have anything to report because the SIPS meeting was canceled this month because we couldn't get a quorum there, but
Okay.
next month. Thank you.
Next month? No problem. Thank you, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just give a brief update. There was last week was a Heritage Foundation meeting, and with a number of topics on the agenda. Probably the most salient and most relevant to tonight's conversation is a significant interest and a significant amount of energy being put into advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and the topic specifically about place names and Indigenous acknowledgement has been very much on the Foundation's radar and a big topic of discussion. So Councillor Green's motion is timely tonight, and I'm sure that they'll be pleased to see that content. I will also update Council with respect to the Greater Victoria Public Library. Since the last update, we have had a regular meeting and also a meeting of the Planning and Policy Committee. With the budget process largely complete for the year and heading, what is in front of the GVPL right now is the need for a new strategic plan. The existing strategic plan is complete as of this year, and the GVPL has elected to conduct a strategic planning process for a shorter period of time than typical. Typically, those would run 5 years. The current plan under development will run for 2 years through 2023, recognizing that there is some need to be nimble and specifically responding to COVID and re-implementing operations post-COVID. So there's been a deliberate move to have a shorter period of time, essentially not necessarily a transitional strategic plan, but something that recognizes that this will be a very much in flux and in transition over the next couple of years. As Vice Chair of the Planning and Policy Committee, that job of chairing the working group working on the strategic plan falls to me. So I was appointed as chair of that. So obviously, if Council wishes to be kept apprised of that, I will be firmly plugged into that process. We'll update Council. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. We appreciate all those updates. I have not a large amount, but I see that it became public news today that Garden Works is moving down the street from the Victoria side of Oak Bay Avenue into the Oak Bay side of Foul Bay. So we're very excited to see that move happen, because I think I've certainly heard from lots of people, including my wife, that losing that garden shop was a real loss for our community. And so seeing it come into Oak Bay is great. Certainly from my perspective, I'm putting a lot of time in right now, both with the Oak Bay Police Board and the BC Association of Police Board, where I sit on the executive on terms of responses to the current ask at the province related to the changes to the Police Act, the committee that's underway right now. So, but I also just want to express my appreciation to Council for attending and to staff for putting a huge amount of work into organizing and preparing, and then all of the volunteers for attending multiple orientation sessions that happened this last week and a half. This is a new thing for Oak Bay, for those watching. We've always had advisory bodies, but we haven't taken up the orientation training, setting expectations. And if you've been watching, which you probably haven't, for 2 years, we've been busily revamping all of our procedures bylaw and all the terms of reference and all these pieces to bring this on board. And we finally have the volunteers appointed. That was the Rise and Report earlier, and this orientation. So it went really well. Really thankful to staff for the amount of effort they put into to make that successful. But I also want to just express to all of you, because it was really, I think, seen by the volunteers how important they are by the attendance of councillors at those sessions, and just to see the faces and to see the names and to understand the liaisons, and it was really positive. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for that. So with that ends my remarks. Is presentation. So first up, we have the Capital Regional District Solid Waste Management Plan, and I'm not sure if Mr. Rennick, I think, would be introducing this session. Is that correct? Or I'm not sure where I turn to for this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Russ Smith from CRD is here, and he will be making the presentation.
I saw Mr. Smith there. I wasn't sure if there was any intro to go with that, but not seeing any, I will make the introduction to Mr. Smith from the Capital Regional District, and appreciate you being here and providing this update to our council So welcome, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch and Council. I'm going to attempt to share a screen, which is always a little bit challenging for me, but we'll see if I can, I'm going to say somewhat seamlessly do that, or maybe not.
It looks like it's working.
Excellent. Now, if I press this button, we should be good to go. So again, thank you very much. As you indicated, Mayor, my name is Russ Smith. I work for the Capital Regional District. I'm the Senior Manager of Environmental Resource Management, which includes Heartland Landfill and Solid Waste Planning. We have had a fairly long solid waste management planning process. I've got about a 10-slide overview, just going to take the council, yourself and the council through our process, let you know where we're at, and then create some space for some questions. I've already received a bit of feedback from your staff as well as other municipal staff, but I wanted to come by and do a little presentation and give an opportunity for questions. So I'll just proceed with the slideshow and then I'll answer questions at the end.
Very good.
So the first piece here is just talking at a high level about the solid waste management planning process. So solid waste management plans are provincially mandated. They're required by the province for every regional district, and it's a 4-stage process that basically allows a board to initiate the process, and then we set some direction, evaluate options, and then we prepare and adopt a plan. There's a lot of consultation in that process, and I'll kind of take you through the steps that we've taken and let you know where we're at. So today we're in the midst and actually on the tail end of what we call phase 2 consultations. So that involved a variety of public information sessions, presentations to councils, as well as First Nations. Obviously with COVID, we've had some challenges and had to be reasonably innovative in terms of doing virtual public information sessions. We did an online streaming session with Gregor Craigie talking about the plan, soliciting feedback. And we've also done a number of neighborhood sessions where we have a Zoom meeting. We call in, for the most part, neighbors of the landfill for some broader conversation around the impacts, and again, solicit feedback. So we'll be going to the CRD committee and board in April and May with a summary of all the feedback we've received and adjustments to our plan that we're going to make. And I'll just kind of take you through the process and where we're at this point. So just as background, we basically, based on the provincial requirements, build a plan off what's called the 5R hierarchy. Now it's the standard, reduce, reuse, recycle, which is the 3 R's. And it also has something called recovery and then residual management. Recovery being how much value can we squeeze out of the material that's left after the first 3 R's, and then residual management is effectively Heartland landfill. So how do we minimize the amount going to the Heartland landfill and increase the amount that is moved up the hierarchy? And that's what our whole plan is about. So the plan goals at a high level, we want to do better than the provincial per capita waste disposal target, which is 350 kilograms per capita. We want to extend the life of the landfill. Obviously, the life of the landfill is important, and we want to keep going for as long as possible. We want to obviously have informed citizens to effectively participate in proper waste management processes, and that builds into making the landfill last a long time. And obviously we need to ensure our solid waste services are financially sustainable. As probably most of the council members are aware, the CRD does not requisition for the solid waste service. So the solid waste service is 100% funded by the tipping fees at the landfill, as well as by potential third-party contributions from what we call extended producer responsibility programs. So the companies that are required to manage the life cycle of their products, which is one of the things that funds the Blue Box program that goes around the neighborhood. So there's just a little graphic there. On average, back in 1989, we were at 671 kilograms of waste per capita. We're now at about 380, and we're working towards 250 kilograms per capita. Just for context, what that really means, it's not that each household puts that amount of waste out. What it is the total amount of waste being disposed of at the landfill divided by the population. So it's waste, which is residential, multifamily, industrial, commercial, and institutional, divided by the population of the entire community. So the plan targets, starting where we're at today, the 380 kilograms per capita, we have a short-term goal to get to 340, which is a big focus on construction, renovation, and demolition waste, probably our biggest one. How do we get wood materials out of the landfill? How do we ensure that either homes are deconstructed or make sure that we are beneficially using that wood and not just landfilling it? That's a huge component of it. In the medium term is a real focus. As residents, we understand on the blue box side and even on the organic side for residential homes, we do pretty good. We continue to improve, but it's slow gains as we continue to manage and promote that. Where the big gains are is in the multifamily, institutional, commercial, and industrial. And so focusing on multifamily as well as the commercial side of things, trying to encourage the province to implement programs, working with the community and our municipal partners to continue to encourage waste diversion in those sectors is our biggest focus. And then long-term plans and the 10 years plus to get us down to that 250 is working with the province on something called extended producer responsibility. And that's where they make the producers of waste or of materials responsible for the life cycle cost of those materials, which includes the recycling. That's how the Blue Box program came about and is now funded by the province or by the producers through the provincial legislation. And they're looking to expand that to commercial and industrial type programs. So anybody who's consuming, not just households, have products that they buy with the embedded recycling and those costs associated in the products and making the producers of those products responsible for the life cycle of those materials. So that's at a high level the plan targets. I'm not going to get into the 15 strategies in detail or the 70 plus actions that are in that plan, despite the fact that the mayor asked me to go through each individual action. But there's a lot in there. I would encourage people to go to the CRD website, /solid waste, and look at the plan. We certainly have been taking it to the community and having the conversation. That is what the feedback on these strategies and actions are, what our report on our consultation will be all about, and the adjustments to the plan based on what we hear. Municipal collaboration opportunities. I talked a little bit about this. I mean, we do work with municipalities in terms of making sure our websites are synced up, that we're promoting the same things. We do a lot of work providing educational materials to both municipalities as well as our educational partners in the school districts to try to make sure we're all singing from the same song sheet. As I talked about, multifamily and industrial waste diversion and commercial waste diversion is challenging. Some of that has to do with zoning, ensuring that we have the right levers and potentially develop model bylaws to share with our municipal partners to see if there's some things that can be done around that, as well as what we call the construction renovation waste. Waste management facility licensing. No one really wants a waste management facility in their community, yet in order for us to deal with the waste we generate within the Capital Regional District, there's a need to look at broader waste management facility licensing, and at least have a conversation about it. Not a huge issue in Oak Bay, certainly in more rural areas it is in terms of illegal dumping, but you can think of it in terms of people putting their couch on the boulevard, which certainly does happen in Oak Bay and other municipalities, and trying to ensure we're promoting and helping the municipalities and our partners in this get waste to the landfill, or even better than that, have it reused and not have it just thrown out. Talk a little bit at a high level about a couple of actions. In strategy 14, the second last one, we're looking at the use of landfill gas right now. Many of you may be aware we take landfill gas and we use it to produce electricity for about 1,600 homes. That program with BC Hydro is in the process of ending. They fully greened their grid. And we are now working with Fortis for the cleaning up of that renewable, or for cleaning up of that biogas to use it as gas that would go onto the Fortis system and displace fossil fuels. So that's an interesting program which has a significant greenhouse gas benefit. And then the second piece that I wanted to focus on in Strategy 15 is around what we call Heartland 2100, and the idea of how do we reduce consumption, but how are we building out the landfill in a responsible manner, making sure we maximize the use of the footprint, but also investigate emerging technologies to see if the densification of waste is something that the community broadly is interested in, and make Heartland last as long as possible. And that is basically what the Heartland 2100 design concept is about. You see the main operating area in the center of the slide. That gets built out through 2045. And then we look at maximizing the footprint to take us to 2100 and beyond. Early stages of this conversation, we wanted to get it onto the community's radar. At the earliest, we'd have any change or trees coming down to make room for the other landfilling space would be around 2030. So we're putting it on the radar, and there'll be plenty of conversations coming. And the more we can divert, the less we will need to expand, and it will slow down the pace and increase the life of the Heartland landfill. And so really I'm at the question side. Bottom line is the plan is here to take us from 380 kilograms per capita down to 250 by 2030. And the plan that we'll be taking to the Environment Committee next month and the board in May will allow us to, if approved, submit to the province and start moving us in that direction. So I'll turn it over to you, Chair, to facilitate any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Are there any questions by council to Mr. Smith? Don't be shy. We just have him for a couple of minutes. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very intrigued if we could take advantage of having Mr. Smith here to maybe speak a bit more about the construction, renovation, and demolition waste. Is it a carrot or a stick process you're anticipating, or a combination of both, or something else?
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you. So it is a bit of both. The construction, renovation, demolition, there's a couple of things that we're going to be exploring. One of them is to send a price signal to waste haulers to bring us segregated loads of wood waste that allow for beneficial reuse, at the very least as a hog fuel kind of coal displacement, right down to better use on the landfill for dealing with protrusible waste that smells, so it becomes a bit of a biofilter. So there's the idea of sending a price signal. Instead of charging $110 a ton, you charge $80 a ton. People are motivated to segregate their loads and get a discount on their loads. So that's the one side. The other is the potential outright ban of those materials. So one of the challenges we have is a lot of the materials of construction, renovation, and demolition waste have things like asbestos in it, have things that aren't easily landfilled or that we need to manage the environmental risk on. So it's a balance of carrot and stick. We'd like to have all carrot, but at the same time, sometimes there's a need for both public safety as well as environmental safety to use bans on items as well.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
A very quick follow-up,
Go ahead.
if I may. Thank you so much for mentioning the asbestos. I presume you won't be banning that, since if you did, there'd be no place to take asbestos in the CRD area. So I imagine with the separation of asbestos, for example, as a dangerous item from the other items, such as maybe old wood paneling or old doors, are you anticipating that any components that could be reused would be reused, or would CRD be facilitating some sort of a process to see that these materials could be somehow recycled?
So good question. Thank you, through the chair, to councillors. Okay, yeah, there's a number of things we can do. We certainly are. You may have heard of a company called the Unbuilders, and they deconstruct homes and then they sell the wood and the materials out of those homes. We'll be working, and we've done some work already with the City of Victoria, and there's other interested municipalities, trying to understand the bylaws and the licensing and issuing of building permits, the process that allows municipalities to motivate that behavior. It's hard for the CRD specifically, just because of the powers we do or don't have to manage it at the front end, because we don't issue the building permits. So we tend to manage the back end in terms of the waste that comes in. But certainly working with municipal partners to promote exactly that, to promote the reuse, the deconstruction, the getting the materials, by motivating people potentially with reduced building permit costs or fines if they're not bringing things out and recycling or reuse them, are certainly things that we'll be investigating.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Any other questions? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Smith, for the presentation. Following up on Councillor Zelka's questions around demolition waste management, that has been an issue for us in Oak Bay for some years now, and it began as a discussion at the Heritage Commission table. And as you know, Oak Bay has, over the last 15 years, certainly we have seen an escalation in house demolition. And it's been a concern about how much waste leaves our community and ends up at Heartland. Is there any idea or talk perhaps about helping communities, individual municipalities, to develop their own waste management policies in conjunction with the CRD? Would that be something helpful? You're at the back end, we're at the front end. So I'm just wondering if there's any room for discussion or assistance to help us in that regard.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Green. Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Sure, through the chair to Councillor Green. I do think there is, and there's some broad language in the plan that talks about policy and bylaw development that are effectively for what I would call the CRD shareholders. I mean, all the municipalities obviously, as I would say, own the company. And if we can provide some language that works on a generic level, and there are some things that you've spoken about, Councillor Green, that certainly the City of Victoria has already talked about potentially exploring and nibbling on some of the edges of those. And we've talked about co-funding some of the work that they're doing so we can take it, genericize it, and get out and talk to our other municipal partners about the potential benefits of duplicating and or building off the work that's been done. So it's absolutely an area that we're focused on.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
I don't see any other hands up. I have one quick question, and that's just, is there anything currently under provincial regulations that allow us to control where waste goes? Because one of the things I think that happens is if the rules get put in place at Heartland, private dumping either off island or up island, and start taking on the waste. Is there any mechanisms to control the waste direction and location?
So to the chair, it's a good question. One of the things we do have in the plan is to investigate what we call flow control. And that's exactly what you're talking about, the ability to control the flow of waste so that we can send a price signal to recover costs and motivate behaviors without the waste either getting on a ferry or going up island to another regional district, because we'd like to manage our own waste. So there's some work that's being done both in the regional district of Nanaimo as well as Metro Vancouver that works on flow control and looks at a number of different licensing schemes that allow them to control the amount of waste, the movement of waste, and keep it within their community. And we are looking at that and are working closely with those regional districts to learn from what they're doing. What we have in the plan right now is permission to investigate and further understand that, because we do believe if you're going to go below 250 kilograms per capita, you need some levers to ensure waste doesn't just run away to a cheaper alternative. And that's certainly something we'll be investigating as part of this plan.
Great, thank you very much for that. I don't see any other hands up at this point. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming here today and responding to our request to come and answer questions and provide an overview. It is a very important part for our region over time. And certainly the waste management with construction and demolition is been top of mind at this table for quite a long time. So much appreciate that update. I don't think we need a motion to receive or just a presentation. So thank you very much, Mr. Smith, for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening. With that, we are on to notices of motion, and we have this is a Councillor Paterson. So this is just to clarify the process here. There was a motion, a notice of motion given, a motion made, then an amendment, and then just due to some time constraints and just to give some time for clarity, we referred this to a future meeting. Under that referral process, it essentially just wipes it clean. We're just taking a notice of motion again. And so there's no need, at this point, there's no motion on the table. So we're just going to take a motion and not deal with amendments or anything else at this point. So Councillor Paterson, I'm going to go to you and leave it to you to make the resolution that you wish to make, and then we'll have a discussion about that.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch. Much appreciated. And I appreciate certainly all of the guidance from staff also in clarifying all of that. Their judgment is much sounder on the governance issues than mine. I will bypass then the main motion and go right to the amendment. So that would be, then it would be, whereas the draft 2021-2025 financial plan sets out policies, practices, and tools to enable council's decision-making on service levels, infrastructure risk, and funding. And whereas the asset management strategy referenced in the draft financial plan defines risk and recommendations to ensure sustainability of the district services and to supplement long-term planning, be it therefore resolved that council direct that staff report on the outputs and measures in the district's asset management strategy by June 2021, and that staff report on the district's infrastructure replacement plan by September 2021.
Thank you very much, Councillor Paterson. Is there a seconder? There's a seconder. Thank you. Councillor Paterson, we've had some discussion on this already, but I'm happy to take, if you wish to motivate or explain, we'll do that now, and then we'll go and take any questions.
Yes, Mayor, thank you for that. And this really comes down to council's responsibility, really, to the mission statement, the 5-year financial plan and bylaw, the asset management strategy and policy, and annual reporting. And for all of those different pieces of documentation, council has clear stated goals that are separate from staff. I also recognize that there's a great difference between managing assets and asset management, and their council's role really is probably more important, I think, in my opinion, for asset management, because the managing the assets is actually, we have a fairly robust platform for that now in the 5-year financial plan, because we have much more robust reporting for that. However, my concern was that in the financial plan, the reporting that would be coming forward to this council on asset management would start in 2021, but then perhaps not be fully coming to council until the fall of 2022. So given that gets very late in this council's term, my concern is certainly that waiting that long to get the any reporting or even a gaps analysis on the asset management would really impede this council being able to have more robust facilitated discussion on long-term financial aspects for the district and sustainability of the district's assets. So, I'm really seeking to expedite the process so that it fits more in line with this council's term, so that we can actually have discussions around the management strategy, around risks, around different diverse options of perhaps funding what we want to do, and in getting more towards the long-term plan. So hence my decision to bring this forward as a motion to expedite the process. And I also really appreciate discussions that I've had with district staff to negotiate perhaps an expedited process. So that's the reason for my motion. But I do understand that in order to actually action these items to staff, or to action any other items going forward on the asset management strategy, it needs a resolution of council. So that's my rationale for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paterson. Yeah, I think to my mind, the first one is directly in alignment with what's been listed by staff as their intention. And the second one, I was thinking it could be more generally Q3, but of course Q3 ends in September 2021. So I think that was the date that staff suggested anyway. So I believe that makes sense. I thought I saw a hand go up there. Just want to make sure, is there? We have Mr. Rennick and on here. I don't see Mr. Payne, I don't think so. Mr. Rennick, was there any flags raised? Just want to make sure on the times listed in this resolution that you're aware of.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, there were no flags raised on our end, and I will point out that Mr. Payne is also on the call.
Okay, he's just not showing up on my screen here, so I didn't see his name. But thank you for that clarification. Councillor Green, did I see your hand go up? Or Councillor Zelka, you were seconder. I'll let you speak if you wish.
Well, thank you very much. I'll just be brief. I very much appreciate Councillor Paterson bringing this forward. Here at Council, we live and breathe and make our plans based on the information that we get primarily from staff. And even if these reports were in an unfinished state, I would hope that the timing would allow staff to present something, because as far as I'm concerned, something is better than nothing. And since we have to continue our rather detailed planning, I very much appreciate this motion being brought forward. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? I don't see any other hands up on this. So if not, I'm happy to call the question. See no other hands. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Paterson. And I think what might be lost a little bit on to the public wondering, sometimes these things are reinforcing intentions, but by council, we also provide a tracked council resolution piece. And so decisions of council, direction of council are measured through resolutions. And sometimes it's helpful for us to have these on the record so that there's a single point in our reporting that reflects those as well. So there's benefit to that. We have a second, just a notice of, a motion here that came, under notices of motion, but this is the motion for contemplation. So Councillor Green, if I can get you to move this, then we can if there's a seconder, we can discuss.
Yes, thank you. I'll move. Whereas the District of Oak Bay, the district is situated on traditional territory of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And whereas the district is committed to exploring more meaningful and collaborative ongoing working relationships with the Songhees and Esquimalt nations within the context of Indigenous reconciliation, therefore be it resolved that Oak Bay seeks guidance from the Songhees and Esquimalt nations on adding Lekwungen place names within the district, and that the district further works with the Songhees and Esquimalt nations on how the district and the nations can advance local initiatives and projects that achieve the goals and principles of reconciliation and ultimately bring our communities closer together.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Councillor Green, the floor is yours if you wish to add anything to what I think is a fairly clear resolution. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I did prepare a few remarks and I will read them. Please forgive that. I hadn't memorized these. This motion represents for us an important step in the process of meaningful Indigenous reconciliation between the District of Oak Bay and the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, formerly known as the Lekwungen peoples. Lekwungen history in what is now Oak Bay predates non-Indigenous settlement and provides significant cultural context to this area, the original Lekwungen territory and its lands. While Oak Bay has actively participated in recent years in a variety of local events and activities to acknowledge and honor Lekwungen history, This motion signifies an active, major step to more fully integrating this important history through Lekwungen place naming. This motion before us tonight represents a truly collective effort. It reflects the commitment of Mayor Kevin Murdoch and Chief Ron Sam, both of whom are supportive, the support of our local MLA, the Honorable Murray Rankin QC and Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, the support and assistance of Oak Bay residents, Marion Cummings and her work, and more recently Bruce Kilpatrick and his work at the University of Victoria, as well as discussions at the community level among members of Oak Bay's Heritage Foundation and the Community Association of Oak Bay, to name just a few. I hope I haven't missed anyone specifically, and I know that these conversations have been ongoing for some time. Should this motion pass, it holds great promise of a unique opportunity for Oak Bay and the Songhees and Esquimalt nations to develop a closer and more meaningful working relationship that flourishes well into the future. And that's all. I've lost the sound, sorry.
Sorry, I think I may have muted on my end. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, sorry.
Okay. There was nothing indicating mute on my screen, so I didn't catch that.
Okay.
So with that, is there any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Ney, as the seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Green, for bringing this forward and working towards really formalizing our intention in Oak Bay about this relationship with the Lekwungen speaking people. And I really just want to add that though not perhaps explicit in the motion, I do know that the spirit of this would support this, that this not be just a government to government relationship, that this really very much is intended to involve our community, as Councillor Green has spoken to around our advisory, but our broader community, which is really critical to this. It's not just about the council and the district building and sustaining this relationship, but our broader community. It's really important. And I know that there's a real receptivity to that now in the community. So the timing of this is very good. So thank you again, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Green for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. I will say, I think every councillor has spoken to me on this subject over the last years, but certainly the last 6 months as a topic. And I just appreciate the bringing a motion to the table that allows us to more formally move this as in alignment with the way the Songhees would like this kind of thing to go forward. Is any other discussion on this item? I'm not seeing any other hands. It's usually a good sign of support. I will then go forth and call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much, Councillor Green, for that. And I look forward to the next steps, many steps, which are going to be the more important piece of all this, but a wonderful way to kick us off. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I also appreciated your support all along the way, and the support of my colleagues. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Next up, we have the Oak Bay Business Improvement Association, and we have Martin Cowden, who is the president of the Oak Bay BIA. And for those, I'll let Mr. Cowden introduce himself and the BIA. And if you hadn't planned to, Mr. Cowden, perhaps just say a few words about what the BIA does for those who might be watching and aren't familiar with the Business Improvement Association, and what is a difficult and strange year for you.
Said it well. It's both a difficult and strange year. I have some thoughts that I'd love to share with you. Thank you, first of all, to all the support that Oak Bay Council, the staff, the support in our community, to Heather Leary, who also does so much to make our plans a reality. I thank you to the community and the people that have supported so many of our events, and it draws so many people into our neighborhood in ways of things like our markets and events of Halloween and Christmas, Unfortunately, we're not doing any of those things this year, so far as we know. We would love to, but it's just not a reality. In your Schedule A on my report, you would note that from Clive Drive to Foul Bay Road along Oak Bay Avenue is our jurisdictional area. Second to that is our business promotion scheme is to develop, encourage, promote, and retain business in the Oak Bay business improvement area through advertising, promotional events, and community activities. I think the real role of our BIA is to add to our community, build community and relationships. I see that both the council and the BIA have similar goals, but different roles to bring people together in our community. And I thank you for your support for that. So going forward, and I'm really encouraged to hear, I'm trying to guess as to where Garden Works is going to move into our community. I don't know the location. I hadn't heard until you mentioned it tonight, Kevin. Thank you. Having said that, you've also received the letter drafted by both myself and Heather Leary, and it gives you an idea as to what we're hoping to do or what we will continue to do in the year ahead. And so, like you stated to begin with, Mayor, this is a year like no other year. So our budget that's presented is a crystal ball that's very cloudy. We just don't know what to expect. We have ongoing expenses and we continue to market and reach out into the community. I think the note of Garden Works coming to Oak Bay, as have other significant businesses, is a reflection that Oak Bay is seen in the business community in the Greater Victoria area as a place that is still vibrant. It's still moving ahead. It has a terrific environment and vibe for people to come into our community. We need to continue this role and not be forgotten. So we do things like continue to market and make our name known in the Greater Victoria area and beyond. So we have presented a budget with some reservation. We're asking that the municipality forward monies received through individual businesses and building owners, and that's funds the monies to make this budget happen. We don't know the realities because it's dependent on, so for your part, we're asking you for $100,000 to be forwarded to the BIA. We don't know what manner and form that we'll get in contribution and support money from other businesses or groups that have supported us in the past, because largely those funds came through events that we hosted and they were prepared to participate because of the recognition of so many people coming to things like the markets and Halloween and Christmas. We are planning to continue to expand our Christmas lighting, and this year it was terrific. It was beautiful. It was such a magical setting to go down the Oak Bay Avenue and see all those lights. We feel that it was good for our businesses. We feel it was good to keep the business, the community, the Oak Bay Village vibrant and exciting. And we got terrific response back to us, feedback from our businesses saying they did very well. So with your help and your support and your forwarding these monies, with the support of municipal staff and administration, with support of Heather and the people in the community, this work and the work of the BIA has been terrific, has had a terrific impact on our village. So I'm asking you to approve the budget that's presented before you. And if anyone should have any questions, please feel free. I'll answer them to the best of my ability.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Cowden. Does anybody on council wish to have any questions or have any additional comments? We have a couple of reps who support the BIA as liaisons as well. Councillor Green, go ahead.
I would be happy to move the staff recommendation, Mayor, if anyone has questions.
That's fine. Yep. Motion is always in order, so it's moved and seconded. The motion is live on the table, so you can make comments or have questions at this point. I don't see either popping up. So that's fine. I think it's a fair, go ahead, Councillor Green.
I'll just make a brief comment that I know how hard the last year has been, and I think some of us heard that directly last summer when we canvassed small businesses in the area. I think the BIA has done a tremendous amount to try and continue their support to sustain, business owners and the staff that work in these businesses. And I know that, many of them, I know our community is grateful for the number of small businesses that have remained open and provided essential services and other services. So anything I think we can do at this point to support the BIA is very worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see any. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I would just reiterate what Councillor Green has said. It's been wonderful working with the BIA, even though it was a tough year last year. They still managed to do certain things that really helped enhance people and how they dealt with COVID, especially at Christmas time around the village with the interactive apps that they had around the village. It was really wonderful. So thank you very much for thinking about those kind of things to bring to the village. And I know Heather had a lot to do with that. So pass along our thanks to her too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I'll just finish that comment then. So one, I just appreciate the BIA stepping into a role that it was never really intended for, which is trying to coalesce businesses to help each other in times of pandemic and finding a path that could work together and be nimble and responsive and find new paths that help everybody. So there was a ton of work on your part, Mr. Countin, and on Heather Leary's part, and I just want to express our appreciation for that. I also just, including things like the augmented reality app that was in the village during Christmas, and lots of really innovative ways that things came together. But I just want to make a little plug in. Hopefully we'll be able to gather towards the end of this year. It is our 20th anniversary of the light up. And so if we could possibly get that together, I know it would be a big event for the community, perhaps too big for the public health officer to allow, but certainly is a big meeting, and it's probably just worth noting for the public that is the 20th anniversary this year. Mr. Countin, anything else that you wanted to add before we called a vote on the motion?
I think that you highlighted something that was really significant, and we moved from competition to cooperation amongst businesses and focusing on how do we help each other and what can we do better. And the other point was a delightful scene to think of how many envelopes were put in the letter to Santa. There's in all of the challenges that we faced, there are so many wonderful opportunities that we got to see. And while we don't like to see lineups standing outside doors in businesses, we saw great lineups outside some of those businesses, which is indicative of people were shopping in Oak Bay, and there was life and vitality. And we are thankful for that.
Absolutely. There were still lineups on Saturday when I was there with my son getting a coffee and doing spending some time in the village. So it's nice to see. All right, I think this is enough time. Unless there's any other comments or questions, not seeing any, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. Spend the money wisely, Mr. Countin.
Thank you, we will.
All right. Up next, item 8.2. This is the proposed communications tower at 2251 Cadborough Bay Road. And I believe I'm going to invite Mr. Anderson to provide an overview of this item.
Thank you, Worship, members of council. Good evening. So the report before you regarding this topic relates to a request from Rogers Communication for a land use concurrence for a proposed communications tower located at 2251 Cadborough Bay Road. That's the Oak Bay Lodge building. What Rogers are proposing to do is locate a 22-meter high monopole communications tower on the property to temporarily replace the existing rooftop antennas on the building. And council direction is requested in relation to providing comment on the proposed telecommunications facility. What I'd like to do is indicate that proposals for these facilities within the District of Oak Bay are subject to a federal approval process, and that's through the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. ISED is the acronym. As part of that, there's a requirement for consultation with adjacent property owners as well as the municipality as a commenting body. What the federal process requires and has exclusive jurisdiction over the regulation of these facilities. The process that the proponents are required to use is the default consultation process federally. And that requires them to notify and provide information to property owners that are within an area 3 times the tower height, as well as respond to those public comments received. And then what Rogers or the proponent would do is summarize the results of this consultation and submit a request to the municipality for a letter of concurrence, which is what we have before us. I would note the proposed tower is at the base, on the northeast portion of the property, at the base of the existing gazebo structure. And also note that Rogers has conducted that required consultation process and provided us with a package that's attached to your report that is both the request for land use concurrence, but also the results of that public consultation process. One thing I'd like to sort of close with on this is that the siting of the tower does allow for the communication service in this area to be continued. It is to allow that existing building to be removed and continue the service, and also to allow for planning for future reuse of that site. The intent, as presented by Rogers, is they would relocate their services onto the rooftop of a new building once that is brought forward as part of redevelopment and at a future date. So I will note that the letter of concurrence would indicate acceptance of the consultation process completed by Rogers. The District of Bay has been consulted, and that the district concurs with the tower location. We do have a representative of Rogers with us, and they're in a position to provide a brief presentation and answer any questions. The fellow's name is Brian Gregg with SitePath Consulting. And Your Worship, at your pleasure, I would leave it for Brian to provide some comments, unless Council would like to provide some questions initially. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to the presentation, but I do see a hand up from Councillor Ney. So was there something, Councillor Ney, before we move on to the presentation?
I'm happy to wait until after the presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So why don't we go to Mr. Gregg, get the presentation, have the presentation. We have the presentation included in our package. Did you wish to share your screen, or should we just use the presentation contained in our package, Mr. Gregg?
Thanks, Mayor Murdoch. Do you have a preference? I have it ready to share if that would be better, but
I think it's always nice to share it on the screen if we can, just because people watching at home then can actually see the pages if they don't have access to the agenda package itself.
Certainly. Okay, I'll give it a shot.
If it doesn't work, we'll just fall back to the other.
Okay.
It's working. Great.
Excellent. And you can see just the presentation, I'm hoping.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, thanks very much for having me here tonight. My name is Brian Gregg. I'm a land use consultant representing Rogers Communications. Before I jump into just a brief sort of overview of what we're intending here, I thought it would be noteworthy that to mention that I grew up in Oak Bay, down on Harling Point, Quimper Street. Spent the first 25 years of my life there. Went to Oak Bay High School, Margaret Jenkins Elementary, UVic, and I mention this just to point out that I'm intimately familiar with the community. I know it's a very tightly knit community that cares a lot about any developments and changes that are going on, and so that's top of mind for us as we propose to continue to deliver service. So just wanted to kind of walk you through what our intentions are, our site selection rationale. Bruce already, I think, gave a clear overview of the process and sort of generally what we're intending, so I won't drone on about that too much more. And then, of course, our request for concurrence. And ultimately just wanted to be here to respond to any questions that may arise about this proposal, because I realize it's not the kind of thing that you might see every day in Oak Bay. So as Bruce noted, we already have basically the exact same equipment operating on the rooftop of the Oak Bay Lodge building. And those antennas that are on the roof there currently provide or represent critical infrastructure and provide a really important service in your community. which is cell phone service and data services. This is, I would say, becoming increasingly important with enhanced levels of remote working, especially during the COVID pandemic. More and more people are connecting to wireless networks for work and just to stay in touch with people generally. And then further to that, it does provide a critical service in terms of supporting calls to emergency service responders, such as 911, your fire departments, so on and so forth. The majority of calls to emergency service responders are placed now through wireless devices. People expect to be able to pick up their cell phone and to call for help when they need it. And this cell site is really one of the only supporting cell sites for Rogers in Oak Bay. So it's a very important item to us. So the subject property is planned for redevelopment, as you all may know, the Oak Bay Lodge. And so Rogers doesn't desire on its own volition to redeploy its equipment. We effectively have no choice. So that's why we're here. So there are limited alternative locations in this area for our type of infrastructure for antennas. In other communities, there are various commercial buildings or rooftops that we could look to deploy on, but this area is largely single family residential. So based on this, what we're proposing to do, and I emphasize that this is on a temporary basis, this is not permanent, we're proposing to shift our equipment off the roof onto a temporary 22-meter tall monopole structure. This is basically the slimmest design solution we have available to us. So this aerial photo shows the location. Obviously, there's a zoning map there showing the P2 zoning designation. This site plan shows Rogers' proposed compound, which, as Bruce noted, is basically we would be taking the place of the existing gazebo, which I understand some people think is a really neat facility in and of itself, but I understand that it is planned to be removed during the redevelopment ultimately. And the other reason for us locating there is that it's level ground and it'll limit the need for us to do further blasting into the rocks that are on the slope. And also it's a high elevation point of land that will allow us to deliver dependable service without having a taller structure. And last but not least, the property owner, the CRD, decided that this location would also be sort of out of the way of their redevelopment and construction activities, which is obviously, very critical. So this tower profile drawing shows approximately how the monopole would look. So as you can see, it's a slender installation. It is a utility pole, of course, but as far as our within our design toolkit, the designs we have available to us, this is really the slimmest type of installation that we can propose. There's no guy wires or anchors or unnecessary visual clutter. So I think Bruce already ran you through what our federal consultation entailed, so I won't perhaps go over this again, but ultimately I'm here tonight to request land use concurrence, and we've proposed some wording that Bruce also provided to you. And so that's the end of my presentation, and I would certainly welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gregg. That was a great overview of the presentation. I'm sure there's going to be a couple of questions. I have Councillor Green, then Braithwaite, and then Zelka up first.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and through you to Mr. Gregg. Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Gregg. And I just have a couple of questions, one of which is, I think someone mentioned that the pole itself is 22 meters high. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And then your consultation, it would be a distance of 3 times that, which is 66 meters, correct?
Correct.
And so I'm just wondering, you only had 3 people provide feedback, and I just wonder, how far did you go geographically on your consultation then? If you can just describe that for me. I'm just having a little trouble with the 66 meters, and then I think if you double that, it's 132 feet. So how far in each direction did you go to consult? Thank you very much.
My pleasure. So effectively, through this federal consultation process that we're required to follow, as you noted, the notification radius is 3 times the height of the proposed structure. The intent there, I believe, is to basically make the consultation requirements proportionate to the perceived impact or the height of a structure. So a taller tower would require a broader consultation, a shorter tower would be less. So we did do the 66 meter notification, which I realize sounds like an arbitrary number, but it's 66 meters as a radius, so in all directions. And in this case, I believe that touched upon approximately 7 legal lots. And we pulled the title certificates for those and delivered our notices not only to the addresses on title, but to owners and occupants generally at those civic addresses to make sure that anyone potentially a tenant or a renter would also receive that notice. And so we stick to that process just so that we're not sort of arbitrarily in an ad hoc way making up alternative processes on the fly. And so that's why we did that.
Okay, thank you.
So seven properties in total.
7, yeah.
Correct, yeah. So I think it's along, if I'm not mistaken, Hampshire Road there. And it was all of within that radius, all of the adjacent, I believe they were all single family homeowners in that case. We did mull over, should we expand? But then that becomes quite arbitrary. And where do I draw the line arbitrarily? There's condominium around the corner. Pretty soon I could be notifying hundreds of people. Well, do I include the condo, or well, if I do that, why don't I do the whole street? And then why not, and so on and so forth. And so we try to, I think, stick to the defined process so that it's, rational and based on a documented process effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
And just one quick follow-up question. Do you know the height of the land on which you are placing the tower?
Off the top of my head, I don't have that data. No, I could easily look into that for you. Our engineering team absolutely has that. That topography is a critical aspect of our planning, but no, I don't have that with me right now.
And the only reason I ask is that while the tower itself is only 22 meters high, placed on the highest point of land on that property would make it much higher. That just seems reasonable, doesn't it?
Well, we do, as you can imagine, try to identify high points of land. And the honest truth is, if we didn't do that, then the tower itself would need to be taller to clear the trees and potentially other topographical features or items in the built environment like other buildings. So true point that being on the high point of land is the case, but that's intentional. If we were lower down, then you would probably find us proposing a much taller structure.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gregg. Those are all my questions for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Braithwaite, Zelka, and Paterson.
I'm just wondering, Mayor Murdoch, if Councillor Ney, who had her hand up before, might want to go first. I've
been keeping an eye out on. I'm happy to take you, Councillor Ney, if you wish, but I haven't seen your hand up again. Do you? I'm happy to let you go next, Councillor Ney. Now that your hand is up, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I thought it was up. I apologize. Thanks, Councillor Braithwaite. Appreciate that. So I guess this first question just to Mr. Gregg. So as I'm understanding the mapping here, the new temporary placement of the pole it seems much closer to the residents than the current location on top of the building. I do appreciate your compliance with Health Canada regulations or whatever the federal regulation is, but is there any reason to be concerned about this proximity to these residents' homes in terms of impact on the health of individuals living there?
Great question. We get that question all the time. And, you know, basically what I always share with people is we have some really good information from Health Canada, as well as Chief Medical Health Officer at the Vancouver Coastal Health Authority. Basically, what these documents share is that as long as we comply with the Health Canada Safety Code, there is no consistent science-based reason to be fearful of or concerned about this infrastructure. As you can imagine, the same antennas were operating on the top of the rooftop of this building for many years, in closer proximity to habitable spaces. We have our antennas on the rooftops of apartment buildings, condominiums, hospitals, office buildings, and so on and so forth. And you know, it's completely compliant in every case with the health code, and we can demonstrate that in a measurable way. And it's very important to us. It's a legal requirement.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, thank you very much, Mr. Gregg. I have a few questions through you to staff. Can I pose
Yep, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Anderson, I was just wondering, when I do understand this is just a temporary moving of the towers. When was this first put in place? Do we have that information? When was the installation of the cell towers at Oak Bay Lodge site initially put in place?
I might actually let Mr. Gregg, I think Mr. Jones is here from Rogers as well, might have that information more at hand. Mr. Gregg, do you know?
If Mr. Jones could comment on that, he may have a more accurate answer than I do, though I am aware it's been quite some time. We could get a specific date perhaps for you if maybe Garth knows, or Mr.
I don't know this. Good evening. Thank you for letting me join. No, I don't know the specific date. I know it's been a key part of our network in the Oak Bay area for quite a long time, but I can certainly find out the date of installation for you if you'd like.
Okay.
Just for some sense of it, though, Mr. Jones, it's multiple years or decades, not months or a year or two. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're talking decades, not years.
Okay. And payments go to the CRD. What is the cost of to the CRD? Is that public information?
I'll go to probably Mr. Jones again on that. Do you disclose the payments to the landowners publicly?
No, we don't. The CRD has recently acquired that property, and no, those aren't publicly disclosed.
And is the lease that you have a current use and the number of cells at that place? Is there? I read in your report that there's no intention to expand. Is there the possibility to expand in future?
Sorry. Would you mind clarifying what you mean by expand?
Well, to put more cell. I'm not sure quite the language you use, but more cell towers on the site,
or more antennas.
What currently? Pardon me, Mr. Mayor.
Or more antennas on that.
Antennae.
On the tower.
That's what they are. Yeah. Thank you.
So there would be no intent to expand the antenna count on this monopole. When it comes to the redevelopment and the installation on the redevelopment, we will work with the CRD as the landowner and with the district to have a responsible installation there. And so the antennas that are installed on the rooftop will reflect what the network requirements are at that time. And we'll work through with staff on that design.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. I have Councillor then Braithwaite, Zelka, Paterson.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Actually, Councillor Nay and Councillor Green have asked a couple of the questions that I have, but I do have some other ones. I'm hoping that you can tell me, please, what's the current height of the antenna as it stands right now on the rooftop of Oak Bay Lodge?
Mr. Gregg? Probably interested here in the relevant height of the new installation to the height of the current antennas.
Yeah, Mr. Jones, do you have any data on the height of the building by any chance?
It's a similar height. I do not have the exact elevation at this time, no.
I think we could certainly get that information for you. We would have it in some engineered drawings, but we don't unfortunately have those in front of us right now. But if I understand our intent with this installation and the height of it, it really is to try to mirror what we currently have. We're not trying to use this as sort of a backdoor attempt to raise up our equipment to some new level. I don't believe that's the intent in any regard. I think it's similar. The height of our structures is dictated, as I noted, by things like topography and tree heights. Obviously, every antenna needs to be incrementally taller than any clutter that might be next to it, including trees. Otherwise, the signal would just get blocked. So we've tried to, I think, as far as our installation goes, this is would be considered at the extremely low scale and for a monopole.
Thank you. I do have a question actually on the antenna itself. I look at the drawing that you've submitted, and I see that you have a foundation of the monopole, which seems to be above a railing, which seems to be, when I look at the line of the ground, the monopole seems to start at a certain distance above where the ground is. So my question is, how tall is the base that this monopole sits on?
Greg, do you know the answer to that question?
Garth, you may know, Mr. Jones rather, may know more about the height of the existing pad or the pad we're intending to install. I'm not sure, but really I think our intent here, and this may not be a sufficient answer for you, we can look into it further, but effectively by replacing the gazebo, we're able to take advantage of that existing level ground that's already been disturbed, rather than try to blast out level ground on the adjacent rock slope. And so I think we're just taking advantage of the existing elevation that's there and then building into that. I don't think that we're adding in some sneaky height at the bottom.
I can add a bit of context to that, is that the installation here is a temporary design, and so there isn't extensive foundations there. It's a ballast mounted tower, and so the tower is measured, the tower is there, and there is some weight on top of the foundation there to provide the support to keep it there. So that's what you're seeing in the designs there.
I guess, yeah, and thank you for that clarification. If I might continue, Mayor, because my question would be then, if that adds 3 meters to the height of the tower, which would then make it 22 meters, for example, then would you not have to go to 75 meters to do your notification of neighbors? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
So I think we're basing the height, if I'm not mistaken, on from what we believe to be the ground level. That was our intent.
So the 22 meters, for clarification, is the measurement of the tower assembly, not just the pole on top of the foundation.
Yeah, so that's like the height of the total structure height above ground level. Like we wouldn't typically, per the ISET or the federal guidelines, be looking at underground piles or foundations, and so on and so forth as part of our notification. So I think the process we went through, I believe, is, you know, fully aligned with what we were supposed to do.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, I guess going along with that, I mean, I understand that you're following the rules, Mr. Gregg, that you're supposed to follow. However, we as council sometimes look at things a little bit differently. And I personally would think, to me, to have only, if it was the municipality that was looking to get information and feedback from residents around there, to have only reached out to 7 residents around that area might seem a little slim. It might have been, in my opinion, and we'll see how other councillors feel about that perhaps more people should have been notified. And I'll take, for example, the condo across the street from this area, which this poll might, in fact, affect the view of some of the people that live in that condo. And so they might have wanted to have a little bit of input into it. I do understand that it's something that's already there and already on a building, so that it is at a similar height. But this being something that once that area is raised totally might look a little bit different. So I'll be interested to hear what some of my fellow councillors have to say about that. And maybe lastly, just on the limited options for placement, I think I know the answer to this, but can you just kind of expand on that a little bit?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Gregg, what options were looked at on the site, and what were the constraints?
So Mr. Jones may be able to comment on that further. I think he was more intimately involved with landlord discussions, but I think this was perhaps the option that was made available to us, taking into account the construction plans.
Thank you. And I know that, go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Apologies. We did look and try to find any other option we could. One of the challenges here is topography and the limited amount of height you can get in the community. And so really we're looking at trying to have a temporary solution here in order to maintain service for the community. And we want to, you know, remove the tower as quickly as possible. This is a temporary structure. And so, you know, when we went out there and we looked and tried to find other options, we did try and come up with other options, but it's very challenging in this neighborhood.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I go to Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Paterson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
Oh, that's great. Forgive me ask forgiveness in advance of the proponents. I've got my amateur radio license from Industry Canada, and my engineering degree may show. So apologies if I get a little bit too technical. But the first thing I wish to ask about is probably more a question for, initially to staff. The first thing I want to touch upon is the heritage value and the potential sacred value of the lands. I understand that these lands, from a historical perspective, were originally settled by a former reeve, a former mayor at the time of Oak Bay, named William Henderson, who lived atop what I believe this area is called Hampshire Hill. First question through you to staff is this the Hampshire Hill area?
Go to Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the historical naming of the area. I know this isn't identified on our heritage register.
I completely understand that. The only reason why I associate with Hampshire Hill is that it was the Hampshire Hill Neighborhood Association, which fought so hard or fought in some ways for some aspects of the certain developments or redevelopments of that site. And that was the name that they called themselves. I believe this is Hampshire Hill, and I could be wrong, but I did want to ask, and you've confirmed that it's not on the Heritage Register, but with an apparent association with William Henderson, who, by the way, built the house directly across the street from Oak Bay Municipal Hall, next to the Bosley's Pet Food Store. That's his house, that heritage house over there. This appears to be the land where he used to live back in 1906, 1907. I wanted to ask, since you've confirmed there is no heritage value apparently on the land, has there been any consultation with First Nations with respect to this small, apparently undeveloped piece of property that may still have some value to the First Nations of the area, the Songhees and Esquimalt.
I'll go to Mr. Anderson.
Yeah.
Is there any involvement in First Nation consultation in this process as far as the municipality is concerned, which is really our bailiwick?
Yeah, no, not with respect to the communications tower. I will note that the planning process that's underway for the future use of the property would be run by the Capital Regional District, and I would presume that they would be having involvement of First Nations in that process. But the cell tower process is one that's legislated by the federal government, and the proponents basically follow the consultation process that's laid out for them in that federal jurisdiction.
And I appreciate that.
I'm going to make one small clarification because I take every opportunity to do this. It's being run by the Capital Regional Hospital District, not by the Capital Regional District. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware.
Thank you.
The owner. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Yes, it is important to know who's paying us taxes in lieu. I don't know, whatever we may not get anything from them, but we'll see. So I guess a similar question then through the chair to the proponents. I know that there's a 66-meter limit of some sort. However, these lands may have some value to the First Nations, and it is one of the few areas that's undeveloped. It is not necessarily, I understand from the initial planning from the CRHD, to potentially put a building where the gazebo is. Has there been any outreach to the First Nations with respect to some aspects related, of course, to reconciliation?
Mr. Gregg, is that part of the process that you follow?
No. So as Mr. Anderson noted, we followed our federal consultation process. There is no stated First Nations consultation as part of that, unless we're made aware, or there is a First Nations entity or group or landowner within our notification. That's not to say that we wouldn't have done that if we were aware, or if we thought that would have been prudent, but it honestly never occurred to me as a former longtime resident of Oak Bay that might have been a consideration in this particular location. So that's why we didn't.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg.
I very much appreciate that. Thank you so much, Chair. And I very much appreciate the comments, and I understand this consultation process and this concurrence process is an opportunity for us to share with you any potential directions that we could potentially provide. I know you're asking for concurrence, and I know it's a federal process, but I do also know that we can delay, to a small extent, the concurrence if we wish to ask for further information. And if we as a body wanted to ask you to possibly do a bit further consultation, I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that we could either in the concurrence embedded in the body, or as further directions for possible additional works or information. Do we have that opportunity, that option open to us, please?
Before I make them go too far down that rabbit hole, Councillor Zelka, is that something that you're intending to ask as part of that for a temporary placement? I'm just trying to get clear. I don't want to ask questions here on things that
the answer is yes, but I want to know
Okay.
whether the option is open to us. The answer is yes. I would be interested in finding out whether it is possible to get input from First Nations.
Let me talk to Mr. Gregg, or Mr. Anderson. Maybe I'll go to Mr. Anderson because this really is a process question. What are the bounds of our ability to provide concurrence? Can we put caveats or conditions upon that concurrence, or requests attached to that concurrence?
Your Worship, thank you. The very basic request that the council has before it is whether you wish to concur with the proposed antenna or not concur with the proposed antenna. If you do not concur with that, you can provide reasons for that. You can also provide some directions that you would recommend that the proponents might consider respecting the location of the communications tower. I would suggest it's quite unlikely that a comment from the municipality to the federal government that they modify the consultation process. It can be sent. I'm not sure how that would be received or addressed by the federal government when they're in a process such as this. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
It is, Mr. Anderson. Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. It is helpful, and I'll certainly wait till I hear from some of my other councillors as to whether to proceed on that aspect or not. So allow me to delve a bit deeper then on some of the aspects of the installation. I am at this walking through the actual federal procedure, the Radio Communications and Broadcasting Antenna Systems Clients Procedure Circular, which I understand is the detailed process that you need to follow as part of this whole process, up on the Industry Canada website. In element number 3 within that policy, it talks about the use of existing infrastructure. A rather straightforward Google search. If I search for location of cell towers near me, I'm brought up with a number of maps. And when I zoom in on the map in that area, it gives me all the details of the existing tower that's on top of the building. And I can see that it's being broadcast at 700 megahertz, 2100 megahertz, and 2600 megahertz, according to this website for Rogers. But in particular, what I wanted to ask about is just, in fact, on the same block, maybe a touch closer to Hampshire Road, but not far from where you're intending to put the monopole, is a TELUS cell phone radio tower that's currently broadcasting at 1900 megahertz and 2100 megahertz. The question I have through the chair is, why would you not want to locate your equipment or co-locate your equipment on an existing tower there, please?
Sure, I can comment on that.
So, go ahead, Mr. Gregg.
I may not know of the precise installation of TELUS. I certainly haven't looked at that particular one, but I am aware that TELUS has throughout Oak Bay an extensive fiber optic network, as well as small cells, which require that fiber network. And they're basically small 1 foot by 1 foot boxes, effectively, that can go on utility poles and perhaps even municipal owned light standards and infrastructure and so on and so forth. So that wouldn't be what we would call like a macro level installation like we're proposing here that'll cover a broader area. Those are effectively small installations that might only cover a 1 to 200 meter radius, and they add capacity to the existing coverage or the existing network that's in place. So we don't have the same ability to do that, given that we don't have that fiber footprint. That, you know, Garth, feel free to top up, or Mr. Jones, I should say, that can be coming in the future. But ultimately, we're trying to basically maintain, in fairly tight order here, service that we currently have through this rooftop installation that will disappear if we don't find an interim solution. And those small cells are not a replacement for this macro type antenna installation. They're
Thank you, Mr.
added in addition to it.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. I'm not going to go to Mr. Jones on that. We are straying off the topic of our jurisdiction here a little bit. I'm allowing it, but I'm not going to go down into the future plans of how Rogers is going to provide their cell service in the region at this point. So go back to you, Councillor Zelka.
I appreciate that. However, it is relevant within the Industry Canada policy that if there is an existing tower nearby, that the policy specifically says that
I think the question's been answered. Yeah, the question's been answered, Councillor Zelka. Go ahead with your anything.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So the question then, next question is, the tower that was put on the existing building that's about to be torn down. I understand, of course, there is a timeline for this, and certainly don't want to hold this up. For the existing installation, since it's a non-tower structure of the existing installation, there was no there's an exclusion from a land use authority and consultation process. So that's one of the exclusions within the policy, which is why the existing installation never came to council. However, this new installation on the tower is subject to our land use authority. But once we approve it, it becomes an existing antenna system, which puts it back into exclusion from Oak Bay Council ever commenting on it ever again. So I've heard you use the word temporary a few times. I see in your documentation it talks about temporary a lot. What is the guarantee that this will be a temporary structure that will be taken down at the earliest opportunity, and ideally within 3 years?
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Zilka. I don't think they can commit to any timeline because that's down to the hospital district's development timelines.
Understood.
But Mr. Gregg, what are the assurances provided that it's a temporary installation?
Yeah, so exactly as you stated, we are beholden to the redevelopment timeline. But as soon as that's complete and we have a path forward to relocate back onto the rooftop, we'll do that at this earliest possible time. But there is a bit of an uncertainty as to when that would occur.
I'm not worried about the
Rogers
timeline.
can provide that assurance where I think, Mr. Jones and through our written documentation, even further to this, but I think we'd be prepared to commit to that. But it would be difficult to say precisely, it'll be 3 years or whatever time frame until we know the plans of the Capital Regional Health District.
If I may continue?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I do have probably about 3, maybe four more questions, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. If the Capital Regional Hospital District, in their wisdom, chooses to put in, I don't know, small-scale houses, or maybe they choose to create a park, or they decide to put a school in, or some type of structure that really shouldn't have a radio tower on top of it at all, what would that do in this case? Would we then at that point, what would happen?
I think we are continuing to flesh out those plans and look for more concrete plans to relocate onto the planned redevelopment once we know more about what that is. And we can also potentially look at other solutions in the community. But yeah, we're really, I think, under the wire to find a solution to keep that service on air that people depend on. And it is a bit difficult to comment on what you're saying in a detailed manner because we don't know exactly what their plan is yet. I don't think maybe anybody does.
Understood. Thank you very much. Is it possible that the equipment could be put on the building across the street on the other side of Cadbury Bay Road, or was that not within the space for since there's an existing building already there?
Mr. Gregg?
I'm not aware of an existing building of a suitable height or location that would provide the type of coverage that we're hoping to maintain. I think we could certainly look at it again, but as far as I know, all the surrounding buildings are on lower elevation land and are only maximum perhaps 3 stories, which is substantially less than even some of the trees.
There is a 4-story building.
Yeah. Yes, other than the brand new building directly across the street, which was just built about 2 years ago. Yes.
That being a strata titled building is a much more complex process. You need 75% of the owners to vote in favor of entering into a contract, and so on and so forth. And given our timelines here to keep the service on air, and the complexities of that and the risks of that, it's a remote possibility. We've done a lot of those with stratas, and due to the burden of needing a 75% 3/4 vote at an AGM or SGM, it's not every time that we get those approved, you could say.
Understood. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to confirm, yes or no, that once this we've provided concurrence and this monopole is up, you can add to it You can change it to 5G. You can add additional antenna, and you can even move it to the rooftop without necessarily of another building without coming back to council. At that point, it becomes exempt from your policy. Is this true?
Yeah, so I mean, strictly legally speaking, if you follow the federal process, you can modify equipment on an existing tower structure,
yes,
like swapping out of antennas, upgrading technologies, as you've pointed out. Those are often activities that occur on existing structures so that we can maintain the latest technology. I think Rogers is very mindful of the wishes of Oak Bay and very aware of the sensitivities of this needing to be an aesthetically responsible structure in a residential area. So I don't think you'll find that we're intending to add a whole bunch more equipment by any means, but it is true that for the federal process, you can add and swap equipment on an existing structure without having to go back to the public or council for additional approvals. And likewise, we can add equipment onto rooftops without consultation. But we do, as Mr. Anderson will know, we do apply for building permits for rooftops. So staff does have an opportunity, even though legally we're not required, for structural reasons. If there is any structural implications, we'll secure a building permit and then work with staff on suitable design integration. We do want to be good neighbors, and the intent here is to provide a service and hopefully to improve the brand rather than upset anyone.
Great. If I may, two more questions, Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Are there any guy wires or are there any support mechanisms beyond the monopole tower that may impede or may interfere with sight lines or views?
Mr. Gregg?
None whatsoever. So that's one of the nice things about a monopole structure is it is truly a slim installation with self-supporting foundation and no guy wires or anchors.
Thank you.
So I think often people are envisioning when they're concerned about aesthetics of cell sites, the towers with wires and anchors all over the place, and
yes,
that's not the case here.
Great. And last question. I was very pleased to see within the policy that there was a check on a 50% energy measurements of the safety code 6 limits. I understand this tower is not to exceed 50% of safety code 6 limits, at least at the initial measurement, or however that process is done. I was wondering if you could speak to the safety aspects and how the 50% aspect is measured, and is there any way that this is made available to the public so that if anyone wishes to look up these numbers, they could be made available in a transparency sort of way?
Mr. Gregg?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, I'll let Garth or Mr. Jones speak to the 50% item. He might be more knowledgeable on that than I am. But having worked on literally thousands of these installations, I've seen a lot of the safety code analyses that come out, and in every case, we have to make sure and demonstrate that we're compliant with the safety code. Typically, these sites, they're very low powered because we reuse the same radio frequencies across the whole network. So if it were high power, it would interfere with the next cell site. And so because of the nature of how they work, we usually operate at a small fraction of the safety code. Sometimes we're like less than 1% of the limit. So 50% is a very remote possibility. And I think Rogers would be very comfortable to be able to demonstrate that we comply, and perhaps that could be shared. I don't know if we would necessarily advertise it or anything, but upon request, if there were a concerned neighbor or something like that, we'd be pleased to demonstrate that we're complying with the code quite readily and easily by a margin.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I have Councillor Paterson, then Councillor Braithwaite again.
Thank you, Mayor. I think several of my questions have been answered, but a couple of questions, perhaps through you to perhaps staff. I think more that my questions are directed to. And so one that I do have for the proponent is if the concurrence is granted, does this by doing so, do we grant provision to co-locate any other vendors' equipment on the pole, or is that anything that is intended or considered by Rogers?
Thank you, Councillor Paterson. Mr. Anderson, or again, that's probably more of a, I'll go to Mr. Anderson, but it might be a question more for Mr. Gregg in terms of what the process is. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Yes, the federal government does require proponents to look at opportunities for co-location. So I would assume that if we've got a pole in place here, that exploration would occur if needed by another communications company. I can't speak to the arrangements that are made between the parties. Perhaps the proponents could speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would be happy to speak just on this one. I couldn't find where to raise my hand there. It's
it's okay.
We're there at the landlord's permission there. So even if concurrence is allowed here and another carrier applied, we would consider their application. This tower is too low to allow another carrier on there safely, but the tower is also not structurally built to add a lot more antennas. It's a temporary structure. The structure is designed to be here and be removed. It's not intended to be there for years and years and years and for lots of antennas to be put on there. We've specifically designed it to put on a foundation that's existing there where the gazebo is, for it to be removed when this is all done. And it's, another carrier cannot come on there without the landlord's permission. They would need access from the landlord. So there's a number of barriers and checks here to prevent all of a sudden this to become a massive structure with all sorts of antennas hanging off it. It's structurally, it's not feasible. Landlord's not going to allow it. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. That does answer that question. The other couple of questions I have, I think for district staff, is if the letter of concurrence is granted, at the conclusion of the need for this installation, is there a responsibility on the part of the district for a formal exit document on this, or any formal inspection of the site, or opportunities for or review of any restorations that might be required at the site?
Mr. Anderson?
So, Your Worship, I'm presuming that the question relates to when the tower is decommissioned. And yes, so we would have a building permit action regarding, well, there would be something regarding the construction of a new building on the property. And then part of that might be the removal of structures as part of that building permit process. So we would have the ability to have conditions or apply conditions on that process.
Thank you. And would that include, Mayor, through you again, would that include an inspection of the site by staff and any flagging of any restoration considerations that might be of concern to the district? Like I noticed there was a temporary access road, things like that. So there, and there will maybe more of that with the other construction that will go on the site. So I'm just, wondering what rights the district has, if any, to require restoration of the site to a condition acceptable to the district and conducive to what was there prior to this taking place.
Thank you, Councillor Paterson. Mr. Anderson, I think go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. One thing I'll mention that we do have a permit process that allows us to look at the site related to a new building proposed under a building permit, and we can look at what is proposed for new, and we can also look at any conditions on the site that need to be restored as part of that reuse or redevelopment of the site. So we have that ability through our permitting process to attend to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Just for the clarity of everybody involved, Mr. Anderson, you're talking about the permitting process of the redevelopment of the site, not for Rogers' installation of this process. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Let me make sure we're all clear on that. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you for indulging me a second time. I'll be very quick. Thank you for putting up this slide, because my question was in regards to that temporary construction access road. And I'm wondering if any trees need to be removed at any point to be able to put this tower up.
Mr. Brigg?
I'm not aware of any tree removal required. One item I might suggest that might provide some comfort, if concurrence is indeed granted, to provide a little extra assurance, we'd be pleased to apply for a building permit, even though it's not, we're under the National Building Code, so it's not sort of legally required, but perhaps there's an additional sort of design review there where we could add in a little more detail and make sure that staff has had an opportunity to review our construction plans in further detail. Some other land use authorities and municipalities do ask us to apply for building permits, even for our towers. And again, we don't need it for our legal purposes, but it can provide a useful opportunity for further design commentary. And we could explore some of these things further, perhaps with staff.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gregg. Mr. Anderson, I'll let you speak to that.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you. As I noted in the report, there may be a building permit required. Our building permit requirement would be applying the code, and if there's a base structure that's beyond the 10 square meters, we would then require the building permit. But as Mr. Gregg indicated, we can also entertain a building permit application to address some of these other issues that have been raised as part of this. It would be on the voluntary note of the proponents to do that, if it's under the 10 square meters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you. I'm just wondering, out of curiosity, I know that there was a proposal to put a tower on the Uplands Golf Course a few months back, and I'm wondering, had that one gone ahead, would this one still have been necessary?
I can comment on that. So I think that was actually quite a little further back, and yes, absolutely, that's a completely different coverage area. And so had we been able to secure a lease or a location there, we would have to consult on it again, go through the same process, come to council, and certainly that's a completely different geographic area that I don't think would mitigate the need for a facility here.
Okay, thank you. And my last question would be on timing. As you've seen, we have a lot of questions sitting around this table. So what is the timing like? Because I know that this has only come to us now, even though I guess the Oak Bay Lodge it's been known for a little while that it's going to be taken down, etc. But what's the timing like for you? Like if you don't get the letter today, what's your time frame for when would be the last time you would be able to receive a letter?
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I just want to clarify for those watching timelines. The timelines known for the demolition really are probably only about 6 or 8 weeks, as that was the time that the first time the CRHD actually formally moved forward with the demolition approval process. So it's not in fairness to the applicants, they can only really work with that because they're obviously wouldn't be looking at this unless that building was actually coming down. So with that, Mr. Gregg, I'll let you answer the rest of the question.
Mr. Jones, would you like to take that one?
So we've been asked to move as quickly as possible from the rooftop. We have looked exhaustively in trying to find other options. There are questions about trying to find the strata across the street. In order to find another option, we need a willing landlord, and there needs to be willing options. We had explored other options. There were not willing landlords on facilities that would work, and so this is sort of a last option for us here to maintain coverage in the community. We know that building a monopole in Oak Bay is not a desired, event here, and it's not something that we would come forward and propose if it wasn't, sort of a last option here. So that's sort of our timeline. It is sort of immediate. They've asked us to shift off that rooftop so they can start demolition as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak a second time. I much appreciate that. And I also am very impressed that the proponents are willing to allow a further design commentary, maybe through a building permit process. I think that would be very appropriate for us, and I don't know whether we need to include that in the actual motion or not. As possibly a subject to. I wanted to ask whether potentially adding consultation with Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations as to allow also a design commentary from them, how that could potentially be possibly made as a subject to as well in terms of adding to the motion. Is this something that we could do from a procedural perspective?
I'm going to go to Mr. Anderson on that one.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Your Worship. As I maybe noted at the outset, the consultation process is one that's required by the federal government. It is the federal government's consultation process that the proponents use. So I would maybe I'll say it again that the local government as a commenting body on the application making a recommendation to the federal government to have the proponents modify the consultation process. I really am not sure how that would be received in terms of the jurisdiction of the federal government and the process that they require proponents to undertake. So that's, I guess, the comment I have on that. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, through the chair, thank you very much. I appreciate the comments from staff. Then maybe making it a subject to might be a bit strong, but I appreciate the offer for a building permit. I was wondering whether the proponents would be willing to offer, at least within the timelines mentioned in the policy. I mean, the consultation timelines are like 21 days here and 30 days there. It's fairly tight timelines. And I understand that, of course, the building does need to be cleared of the equipment on top. Whether it's possible, the proponents would be open to, in the spirit of reconciliation, to reaching out to this area. And if I may, I can share my concern. Would that be appropriate to share, like what I'm concerned about here?
Please, you better. Yes, you better.
Very briefly, in the uplands. When the uplands were developed, there were all these mounds of rocks lying all over the place. And it was like, what the heck are all these rocks doing here? And the developers of the day just cleared the rocks away. It turns out they were burial mounds and no one knew. So I would be horrified to find out after the fact that, the road was put in right across something that looks like just a pile of this or just something like that. Since these lands haven't really been built upon. I would be horrified if we didn't at least ask the question, is there anything we need to worry about on these lands from a First Nations perspective? These are my concerns.
Okay, I'll actually go to Mr. Anderson on that. I know there's formalized processes on these pieces, but perhaps you can address Councillor Zelka's concerns.
Well, maybe I should reiterate my point of for the future use of the property there, which is being managed by the Capital Hospital regional district. That process would be one that could entertain the consultation that you're speaking of. What we have here is a proposed location of a pole on an existing concrete platform. So there's not a, if you will, a disturbance of a site that's beyond an already disturbed site. So I would suggest it's more appropriate that the consultation occur as part of the future land use and redevelopment process with First Nations and as managed by the Capital Hospital Regional District. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't see any other hands up, so we just need to get to a motion here by council. We have quite a few other things on this agenda that we still have to get to. So Councillor Ney and then Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The concern I have with this process, I guess, is with no disrespect to the consultation that has been done, because I do appreciate it's been done. It's in compliance with the federal regulation, but we're in an unusual time with COVID. And personally, I find it a bit concerning that we only had 3 people respond to the consultation, and there were a mere 7 residents that were made contact with, I understand. But with such limited feedback about the concerns or impact that this may have on residents or their perspective, I'm concerned about moving forward. And I'd like to ask Mr. Mayor, could it be the case that in our effort to just open, because the public doesn't have an opportunity to have input at this meeting because we're at council. And I'm wondering, Mr. Mayor, if there would be an opportunity to refer this to committee of whole, put it on that agenda so that at least there's an opportunity for individuals in the community to comment on this application process.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. I don't, I'm going to actually perhaps go to staff on that one. I think we can refer anything we want to committee of the whole. I think we just have to do it judiciously in a way that makes sense for what we're trying to achieve. So I'd probably actually go to Ms. Williams here in terms of process. Is this an item that that council, if they decided to refer to a committee of the whole, could do so?
Hi, Your Worship. Thank you. Certainly, if there are no restrictions within the federal process that's underway, there's no reason that council couldn't refer this back to committee of the whole.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Anderson, is there any restrictions?
Yes, Your Worship. If I may, the consultation process is a federal consultation process, and the municipality does not have a consultation process developed for, or a protocol around consultation related to the federal jurisdiction of land use approval for communications towers. So I would not recommend, and we would not be in keeping with the federal process if we were to conduct our own consultation once the proponents have already completed the federal process, and they're then would be making application to the federal government for the tower approval. So I would not deem it to be appropriate for the municipality to now undertake a consultation process associated with the tower. Thank you.
Just for my clarification, the role in council in this case would be to, if council felt strongly in that direction, could ask the applicants to go out and extend the coverage of their consultation, or perhaps even better, ultimately develop a policy that lays out the municipal requirements for such a consultation, which I understand is possible but is not in place in Oak Bay. Is that correct?
Perhaps, Your Worship, I will speak to the consultation protocol. I would suggest the majority of municipalities do not undertake this, and it's in primary because we don't have jurisdiction over approving the land use. We basically are a commenting body to a federal government process. So for the municipality to conduct a consultation, it really isn't in keeping with, I guess, the approach we take when we don't have jurisdiction over the approval of the land use. we're basically in the role of a commenting body. And I guess perhaps the other point to make is that it's a commenting body, and council is basically being asked, based on what they've seen, whether or not they concur that consultation has been enough for council to make a decision or recommendation on concurring with the tower siting or not. That's really what council is being asked with this process. Thank you,
Mr.
Worship.
Henderson. Councillor Nay.
It's a curious process from my perspective, because I don't see the place where the community can comment on something that, you know, is impacting, you know, the lives of people in different ways. But I guess I have one more question then to staff, if I may be. I know you're trying to get to a motion, Mr. Mayor, but does the CRHD, I mean, they've obviously thought this through, but if we move this forward, obviously this creates some constraints on the kind of development that could go forward on this property, I presume. Like, so this is to Mr. Anderson through you, Mayor. I just wondering, like, if the CRHD in their process to consider future development was considered, let's say, a daycare or some, I think Councillor Zelka mentioned this, or some kind of facility where children were around, would this cell tower be allowed to be installed if there were children, for example, using a facility?
Thank you, Councillor Nay. I may actually go back to Mr. Gregg or Mr. Jones on that question. At the end of the day, that's for the CRHD to work out. They may have to change that. But are there any restrictions in terms of land use for these for any federal restrictions on what services can be in a building that hosts one of these towers on top?
So I can comment on that. So no, there are no such restrictions. Basically, there's a single safety code that applies to all locations. And as you can imagine, we have our installations basically in every type of location you can imagine. There's even antennas on the rooftop of BC Children's Hospital, on top of buildings where there's daycares. We have towers near schools where there's children, in residential areas where people live, and so on and so forth.
Thank you, Mr. Gregg. I think that's answered. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Nay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll leave it for another councillor to make a motion. Okay, I've hit a dead end on this.
Sure. Go ahead, Councillor Green, and then I have Councillor Zelka again.
Thank you, Mayor. Are you taking just questions at the moment or comments as well?
We can take comments. We do need to get to a motion to move things forward. So generally we like to have a motion and speak to the motion to kind of keep things clear. But if you have some general comments that are brief, that sort of help clarify a path forward, that's always appreciated.
I'll save my comments then for after a motion. Thank you.
Okay, then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak again. First question is a confirmation. It appears that this consultation process began on January the 15th, according to the documentation supplied. That appears to be the letter that was sent out to the landowners nearby. Did this process begin on January 15th in terms of what's referred to as the consultation must be completed within 120 days? So was day one January 15th?
I'll have to open up our package here. Well, 1 second, I'm going to stop sharing. I don't have that memorized.
It's okay. I don't think we need that on the screen anymore. So
okay. And pardon me, Councillor Zelka, where did you get that date?
Was the last in the communication that was sent out to the landowners. It's at the very end. What page number would this be?
Yeah, so that's correct. So yeah, January 15th, I'm just looking at it now. That would have been our...
And would that be considered the beginning of the 120-day land use consultation process?
So the 120-day comment that you're referring to is supposed to be the absolute maximum timeline, but people actually have a 30-day comment period relative to our initial posting. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that it takes a full 120 days. That's basically, I believe if you read the wording in that CPC document you're looking at from ISED, that says that, and we don't really do this because it sounds heavy-handed to do it, but that it should be an absolute maximum of 120 days. Rather, it's more, we give people a 30-day comment period, and then there's certain response timelines that we're supposed to adhere to, but we responded to the comments that were received, provided all of those, and didn't receive any further follow-up. And so the comment period effectively came to a close within less than a 120-day period.
Yes.
So it's more of a 30-day period, really, unless people continue to follow up and so on and so forth.
May I continue, Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Section 4.3 of that federal government policy on concluding consultation does talk about the formal contact with the land use authority. There's a 120-day process as part of that, I guess, which is part of what we're doing right now. And I would presume that at the being most generous, so January 15th probably is right at the beginning. So to make sure that we're not in contravention of any federal laws, as long as we complete this at no longer than 120 days, it sounds like we could continue our consultation internally, at least our discussions internally, until we come to a concurrence or not. So while I hear staff suggesting they may not recommend a referral to committee of the whole, it's something that I would be very much open to. And I don't know whether we need to pass the motion first and then refer it to committee of the whole, or whether we just refer the whole thing kit and caboodle as is, and then deal with the motion once it comes back. So from a staff perspective, how would we refer this? Do we need to have a motion on the table first?
It would be referred to, the motion wouldn't be referred, the matter would be referred.
The matter would be referred
to a committee of the whole. And just so we're clear on timelines, that would be,
yes.
I'm trying to think here what the date would be. Is it the 13th, 12th? Yes. That's the Monday is council, so that would make it the 19th of April would be the committee of the whole, and the 26th of April would be the first chance council would meet again as council to actually make a decision.
And that would keep us within the 120 days. Yes. So this is something I would like to move that, please, that the matter be referred to committee of the whole, so that we can, discuss this in
before it's seconded. I just want to make sure that I'm right on that that process. So, right. Ms. Williams, is if this is the will of council, is that the correct that the whole matter is not the motion, but the matter be referred to a committee of the whole?
Well, it's flexible. It is, Your Worship.
And just okay, and just so I'm clear on this, this under our procedures bylaw here is under as a referral from another level of government piece, and is not for public input. But if it's on the committee of the whole, that I'm just want to make sure we're not breaching any. I guess at the end of the day, council can if it's at the committee of the whole, all items there essentially are open to public input. Is that correct?
Except items that are related to land use that have a statutory public input opportunity attached to them. So I think this one is skating incredibly near that, and it's not our statutory input opportunity, but it's certainly a federal one.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Just again, I'm going to go back to Mr. Anderson. And anybody else, frankly, that might have some knowledge of this on staff as to what the intention or the wording of that statutory regulatory consultation implies if we can or cannot do this. Mr. Anderson, do you have an opinion?
Yes, Your Worship. I think I've probably provided it, but I think I'll restate that given that the federal government has a default consultation process that the proponents have undertaken, and the municipality does not have a an approved public consultation protocol, that what is used for this application in this process is the federal government's consultation. So for us to effectively ad hoc commence a consultation process, I believe would be highly unusual. But I can't speak to the legality of it, Your Worship. Fair enough.
Sorry, Ms. Williams, you said, I have to put you on the spot here. You said this is skating incredibly close to that. That's a red flag for me, but you have, now that you've had a chance to kind of listen to Mr. Anderson or think a bit more, are you able to provide any more firm advice, or is that just as close as we can come without more time to prepare consideration of that?
I think without more time to consider all of the clauses in the procedure bylaw, my understanding of the intent was that public input opportunities would be prohibited where the item had a statutory public input opportunity attached to it. So without looking at all of the clauses in our procedure bylaw and trying to pull together the full picture of that, I would hate to give you a hard and fast answer.
Okay, I mean, worst case scenario, it would be referred, it wouldn't be allowed to have public content and then come back out again. But it's pretty clear what the general principles attached to this are for us to deal with this at our table. But we have a motion currently to refer. Councillor Ney, you're going to put your hand up to second. Is that still your intention? I'll go to anybody.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor. Sorry.
Okay, so the motion to refer this to a committee of the whole is on the table. Those are debatable. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Oh, thank you. I'll do my best to motivate. As long as we stay within the 120 days, it seems to me that providing receiving information at the local government level is not necessarily in contravention of anything. I certainly would not want to exceed any of the time limits within the federal government statutory aspects. And the policy is fairly clear online in terms of what's available to us. And I am so appreciative of the proponent of Rogers bringing forward a design that seems reasonable, and I'm not worried about the safety aspects. I'm not worried about even the look and feel. I'm a bit worried about the actual site location, but and I would love to hear a bit more information about Hampshire Hill, certainly from more of the people in the area. That's what I'm hoping to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Ney, you seconded. Anything else you wish to add?
No, I don't have anything to add. I'm confident we can figure out whether we're going to be fully in compliance with the Fed regs, but I would like to see this be a bit more opened up to our community.
Okay, so there's a motion to refer on the table, so we're speaking to that motion. I will go to Councillor Appleton, who's yet to speak first, and then Councillor Green, then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Worship. Speaking against the motion on the table, I recognizing that there may be some legal questions around the referral in the first place. Council has also heard me speak to similar items in the past that we do not have a process established for receiving public input of this nature. And I am concerned that referring to the committee of the whole will create an expectation on behalf of the community that we will be able to receive input and receive feedback that we may not be able to action. So the procedural elements still to be worked out. I think that there are some very significant, this being a federal process, there are some very strong limitations on what it is that we are actually able to action. And so, as I've stated before, I do not like creating a expectation on behalf of the public that if they provide input, not that I want to disincentivize input, I just want them to be able to provide input in a way that we can actually do something about it. And because this is a federal process, we are very limited in that regard. So the confusion created around referring to committee of the whole leads me to not support this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Appleton. I see Mr. Jones has his hand up as well from Rogers and may be able to shed some clarity on this as well. So I'm going to go to you first, Mr. Jones, and then we'll come back to council.
Thank you, Mayor. Apologies. I just want to add there's one more timeline in here, and that is the landlord and they're demolishing the building. And they have asked us to remove our equipment from the building. So there may be the 120 days that you're looking at, but we also, we may have to decommission the site because of the building owner's wishes. And that would lead to a service impact to the community and would have to, that's what we're trying to avoid in this case. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, do you have, is there a hard date? I know that they're actively starting that process, but do you have a hard date of when you have to be off the roof at this point?
I have not been, I do not have a hard date. I've been told as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I'm now going to Councillor Green and then Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And I have listened to this with interest and followed this with interest because in the mid-2000s, the municipality of North Salish had a very similar situation. It was an application by a server to install a cell tower not far away from Deep Cove Elementary School and residential townhome development. In the end, the community was not in favor of the location. And in fact, the proponent ultimately abandoned the application and the cell tower was not installed. And at the time, although the science is not exact on the impacts of microwaves on human beings, the fact that it was a school and these were children was a real concern. So that will then link to my comments generally, not so much on the motion at hand, but also just generally on the situation. I empathize with the company that they have been told to remove their equipment from the location because of the obvious demolition that's going to occur. I would have been interested to know how long this installation has been there and what the process was then, years ago, in terms of community consultation. But I guess my biggest concern is that if the community doesn't know about something, then it's very difficult to comment on it. And in this case, we have a school within a block and a half of the location. We have high density residences all around the area. And yes, this equipment has been on the building for some years, but I, for one, and I've lived in Oak Bay 10 years, I wasn't aware that there was equipment installed on that building. And so I guess my feeling is that we have to the north an elementary school, we have neighborhoods to the east, west, and south. And I appreciate what Mr. Gregg said. He did talk about being a good neighbor though. And he said he did have the option of expanding the consultation. And I guess my feeling is good neighbors might want to do that if they sense there may be some opposition. But I really think forewarned is forearmed. I think neighborhoods in the area, the school district, and also the school have not been informed. They're not aware of this installation proposed. And I guess my next comment is that I would be very interested to hear from Dr. Stanwyck, our own Island Health public health officer, who himself was a pediatrician. I would be interested in his comments or input. But having said that, I realize time is of the essence. There are issues with decommissioning the equipment and then trying to find a temporary location for the pole. But those are my comments in general. And I am concerned about the fact that our community is perhaps not as well informed as they should be. And that also illustrates to me that Oak Bay perhaps would want to look at developing some kind of protocol ourselves for consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks, Mayor. Boy, I'm really oscillating back and forth on this. I mean, I know in my original comments, I talked about how many residents had been contacted, and only getting 3 responses out of 7, like 42% of the people who were contacted got back to us or to Rogers. But I'm just really, I'm so torn because I also listened to Councillor Appleton's comments, and I think that he's correct. I think that the consultation has been done in a way that it was supposed to be done. Would it be interesting to hear more from our residents? Absolutely. But I don't know then I go to the fact that this has been on this building for X number of years and it hasn't had any effect, and people haven't, whether or not they have been aware of it or not been aware of it. Obviously, some people must have been aware of it. That it hasn't had any effect on the neighborhood or the surrounding schools, etc. So I think I'm going to vote against the motion, but yeah, it's just a tough one. It's a very tough one.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I'm just not seeing any other hands up. I'm going to just speak. I'm going to speak against the referral motion. I appreciate the discussion here. I'm trying to think of any. There are times we have to, as a body, make decisions on things, and there are times when we are not the body that's driving a process. Just similar to sometimes a strata council will manage their process, but you know, we wouldn't refer, you know, to another body these pieces. You know, the federal government has their role, we have our role here. And I just look at this. Do we agree that a temporary tower is needed? Clearly the building is coming down. Clearly there's a significant benefit to the community of not creating a giant gap in service for months or years as the building goes up. They need to have a temporary solution. I wasn't in favor of the gazebo coming down, but I've actually been convinced that it has to be in that consultation out of the way of the building of the site redevelopment. So it has to be off to the side, which is going to make it closer to one building and farther away from others. And it has the benefit of sitting on an existing concrete pad. And if we're trying to minimize disturbance to the site while the site development goes on, this is the obvious place to put it. It meets the needs of the service provider. It meets the needs of the owner. You know, I had those questions, but I don't see that this is something that benefits from additional community consultation. I think we're going to open up a giant can of worms here when at the end of the day, we have an obligation to make a decision on this, on the merits of this. We're not changing the level of service. We're trying to accommodate an existing level of service in a way that's reasonable. To my mind, this is reasonable. I don't think going to committee of the whole to have we've spent what, an hour and a half or something on this one item already, to spend another 3 or 4 hours of time on what is clearly a necessary process. I wish there was a way that was built into this, the takedown, but I do believe the CRHD does not want this on their property other than on the roof when it's completed. So I think there's a built-in safety measure here on that. And I think that at the end of the day, we have to trust our partners, both the service providers and CRHD, to be reasonable in their approaches, that it'll come down when it's no longer necessary, and that it meets the requirements, but no more of Rogers to continue the services that are there. I was very heartened to hear that the design chosen was actually quite intentional, not to be able to handle significant expansion of services or changes of services as well, because I think that would be the primary concern of people. Are you upping something that isn't there? And that's not the case. We're existing. It's an apples to apples move, you know, whatever it is, 100 feet or something across an existing lot. So I can't support a referral. I think sometimes council has to make decisions and deal with them and move on. And this is one of those cases to my mind. So that's my 2 cents on the referral motion. Any other discussion? I'm not seeing any. I will then call the question on the referral. All of those in favor? And those opposed? So I have Councillor Paterson, Green, Appleton, Braithwaite, and myself opposed. So that referral motion fails. We're back to the need for a real motion to whatever that piece is. Before we get to a motion, can I just ask, there's a point raised about a building permit being offered, or at least following a process that allows staff input. Does that require to be part of a motion, or can there be an agreement here, as it was an offer from Mr. Gregg and Mr. Jones to utilize that process, or at least one that follows a building permit process, so there's some staff comment on the siting of the road, etc. I'll go to Mr. Anderson on that. Is there a necessity, if that's a will of council, to include that in the motion?
Your worship, but I wouldn't include that in the motion, but perhaps we can have the comments recorded as part of this meeting. We can take that to the proponents, but the motion really centers around the cell tower concurrence, respecting the federal process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Appleton, your hand is up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would make a motion I would move the staff recommendation.
Second.
So that's moved and seconded. Anything you want to add to that, Councillor Appleton?
No, I would just note, thank you, Your Worship. I would just note that I concur with your comments that you just finished making. I think that certainly I appreciate all of my colleagues' comments with respect to a fulsome public engagement process. I don't deny that certainly an expanded process might have been valuable in this case, or that involving more people would certainly provide a more fulsome view of the community. I certainly recognize that and don't want to disempower that. Then I suppose my position would be then council may wish to cast its eye to the future and to potentially start the process of thinking about an in-house process of our own that would guide such things in the future. We are somewhat limited by the absence of that in this case. So I'm in favor of moving this forward as it stands, but certainly would also be in favor of developing our own process that would mandate an expanded consultation in future.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Is moved and seconded. Is there other discussion on this motion as it stands? Not seeing any hands going up, virtual or otherwise, so I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? And any opposed? I have Councillor Green and Councillor Nay opposed. Thank you very much for that. That motion passes, so that's to receive and to support the concurrence piece. So I think that ends.
A point of information, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
A point of procedure, actually. For us to proceed with an in-house process on cell phone towers, would we bring that forward and during next year's priorities? What would be an appropriate forum for bringing that forward?
Yeah, I think you could even do a notice of motion at a future meeting if you wish, Councillor Zelka, or later in this thing if you wish to bring a motion. I think a notice of motion, it maybe takes some time to think about it, but a notice of motion, just probably to add that as a possible piece of the zoning or other work underway that we're doing some refreshes of, would make a certain amount of sense so it doesn't get lost. Thank you for that. And thank you very much, Mr. Jones and Mr. Gregg, for your time tonight. I know that was probably a longer time than you were expecting to talk to it, but I think really appreciate, we don't get these very often. And so the level of detail and information is appreciated. If council has these questions, I'm sure our community do too. And it's often worthwhile just to go through this process. So thank you for that time tonight and have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Item number next, the rest of the agenda is subject to public input. And so perhaps we can, Ms. Williams, just put up the call-in numbers for people, and that would allow us to go through this a little bit more expeditiously. So any member of the public that wishes to address council can either raise their hands within the Zoom application using the reactions and then selecting the raise hand, or you can just call into the 1-855 number that is shown on the screen. The first item subject to public input is under reports and memorandum is item 9.1, which is driveway access bylaw amendments. And Mr. Rennick, I believe you are here to give a brief overview of this. I think the report is fairly clear. Go ahead, Mr. Rennick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I will be briefer than the marks that I had prepared. We are essentially looking for direction to amend the driveway access bylaw so that staff can grant an exemption to the 1.1 meter maximum width on footpaths. These do come up from time to time if there's someone who has an accessibility challenge, and at the moment, staff does not have any power to grant variances. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. Are there questions of Mr. Rennick? Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have one question, Mr. Rennick. If this is something that did go forward, I'm quite fine with this going forward, actually. I'm just wondering, though, if there's a request that went to staff and staff had to turn it down for some reason or another, but the proponent wanted to come to council with the request, would that still be allowed?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, to council, We have not yet written the amending bylaw, and if that is something that council would like to see in the amending bylaw, that's absolutely something that we could do.
Thank you, Mr. Rennick. I think it's probably going to come up as a question. So I think when the bylaw comes back, if we can at least be clear on the pros and cons of that, of the different processes attached,
Yes.
then we can consider that. Any other questions of Mr. Rennick? It's funny, my cursor is a hand and it was floating over top of Councillor Appleton's screen. So I thought he had his hand up there for a second. Councillor Zelka?
I'd just like to move staff recommendations, please. I think it's quite reasonable.
Moved. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. I just have one quick question for Mr. Rennick. I just noticing in the reading the bylaw that the current 1.1 meter width is actually a cause of some of the problems for these pieces, because I appreciate it's there to minimize hard surface, but I know with things like interlocking pavers, which are often 8 inches across, they fit naturally to a 4 foot as opposed to a 3.88 or whatever it is foot width that's there right now. Is it possible to just look at that as in the course of this review and bring back any possible changes to the default width so we have fewer of these exemption requests that come forward? Mr. Rennick?
The 1.1 meter width is actually a cause of some of the problems for these pieces, because I appreciate it's there to minimize hard surface, but I know with things like interlocking pavers.
Oh, someone's got their thing on. Mr. Rennick, did you hear my question?
Yes, I did, Your Worship. Sorry, I wasn't sure what was going on there. We absolutely could look at revising the minimum width. The maximum width. It's there for a good reason, as you say, to ensure that the majority of the boulevard along a property frontage stays green, but there's no particular magic to that 1.1 meters. It could be 1.2, it could be 1.3.
Okay, I think if we just leave that as a potential to bring back as part of this revision and just have a look at it. I think there are it does seem to cause some grief where it is just a little too narrow for people to carry on a natural width of their walkway. And so just for consideration of council, I think it doesn't need to be part of the motion. I think that can be just done as a matter of interest for us as a possibility. I don't see any other hands up. So the motion's on the table. I do want to invite the public to speak. I see there's been one phone call come into the group of people. If you wish to speak, Ms. Williams, are you managing the people who are coming into the meeting?
Your Worship, there is a phone number that has entered. If they wish to speak, if they could simply hit *9 to raise their hand, although I'm just looking down through the list and they appear to have left the meeting.
They do. Okay, I don't see anybody else in the meeting at the moment. So I'll take that as I'll just double confirm. Is there anybody who's called into the meeting who's indicated they wish to speak?
Nobody at this time. If somebody does come in, I will indicate for you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. So back to our council table then. Is there any other discussion to the motion that's on the table? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. I'm missing one here. Hold on a second. For some reason, Councillor Ney, you've dropped off the bottom of my slide, so I'm going to, yes, thank you for bringing that back up again. I think the addition of Mr. Rennick speaking limited my thing. So thank you for that. That passes. Was there anybody in opposition on that? Just not seeing any. That passes. Item 9.2, the Oak Bay Lawn Bowling Club lease renewal. We have Mr. Meikle here from Oak Bay Parks and Rec. This has already been in front of council. This is the agreement that, given that direction that was given by council. Mr. Meikle, anything you wish to add to this item?
No, thank you, Your Worship. I don't have anything to add here.
Okay, and I'll just again invite any members of the public that wish to come to speak to council on this matter may do so. Again, by on the Zoom raising your hand or by calling the number on the screen and hitting *9 to raise your hand. Councillor Green and then Councillor Braithwaite.
I'm prepared to make a motion based on the staff recommendation.
And I'll second.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. Any additional comments? Not seeing any. Okay. Staff, is there anybody who's called in and indicated they wish to speak to this item?
Nobody has called in, Your Worship.
I'm just afraid of always going too fast that we miss people's opportunity to call. So I'm going to wait a couple of seconds here just in case anybody who's watching wishes to call in. This is your opportunity to do so. In fact, if you want to talk to any of the items that are on the agenda, you may do so now, and then just be prepared to hit *9 to raise your hand when the item comes up. But not seeing anybody, I'll go back to the council. Is there any other discussion on this item? Councillor Zelka?
Thanks. Just a quick question through you. I don't see any correspondence, and I noticed that the notice went out in the newspapers. Was there any comment received at all? Maybe even verbal, possibly?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Ms. Williams, was there any feedback received?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, the notice did go out. It was run in 2 consecutive editions of the newspaper, and no comments were received.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm not seeing any other discussion and no hands raised to speak, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. Thank you very much, everyone. We're moving on to the Arts Laureate Program and recruitment, and we have a number of options. Thank you, Mr. Meikle, for the thorough report here. Welcome back, Mr. Meikle. I'll give you the chance to provide a little overview here of the report, the very detailed report that you provided.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I will try to keep it brief. And just given the motion back in February of re-advertising the Arts Laureate position and considering how to structure that application process, staff took the opportunity to re-examine the role based on feedback received during the terms of reference review last year. And the feedback there was really that the position itself as a volunteer position was a lot to ask for. It was a significant volunteer position. And so in going through that process, staff took the time to do an environmental scan of what other jurisdictions were offering in terms of Arts Laureate type positions and provided some of those options here. So staff are just seeking direction from council on how to potentially restructure that Arts Laureate position if desired prior to re-advertising the position to be filled in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meikle. And I appreciate the breakout into 3 different options and with some options within those options to help guide some of the conversation. So we'll take questions from council and maybe just some indication of where your preference lies within those options would be helpful. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I think that to me, the thing that I would really like to touch on first is that I'm not supportive of an honorarium for this position. I think we have many positions, volunteer positions throughout our municipality where our residents give very willingly of their time. And I would hate to start giving honorariums for those positions as well. I think at this time, I would prefer not to have an honorarium for the Arts Laureate position. And I think I'm favoring option 1 so far, but I'd love to hear from everybody else too.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Other comments? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I would concur with Councillor Braithwaite's comments. I think honorariums have a place, but I don't think among our many volunteers and committees and commissions in Oak Bay, I really don't think we should start to differentiate based on honorariums. So I would hate us to be perceived as putting value on one position over another. I think everyone makes a very valuable contribution to our community, and we depend a lot on volunteers. So I would agree, and option 1 seems to be very reasonable.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see a lot of other hands up. I'll jump in there. Go ahead, Councillor Ney.
I guess I'm of 2 minds, honestly, because I'm very aware of the enormous amount of work that the Arts Laureate has done in the past, and the leadership role is of a different. It's not that it's more important, but the amount of work, at least in our first, that that was contributed by our first Arts Laureate was quite extraordinary. And I don't know if that is the expectation of any future Arts Laureate. So the idea of some kind of honorarium to me seems reasonable. And I'm also very aware that in the area of the arts, generally speaking, it's often the case that they're asked, you know, there's a lot asked of those in the arts to perform or to contribute for no pay. And I think it's I think it's important to demonstrate some form of compensation, generally speaking, but I because I'm not 100% sure, and I like the option 3 that would refer this back to the PAC and get some feedback from that committee about a preferred model that they see going forward to help inform this decision here.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
I think Councillor Green was in front of me, Your Worship.
Oh, she had already spoken once, that was all, so I thought I would go to new speakers first, if that's okay.
Thank you. I guess I would speak generally in favor of, I think many options would work. I think I'm probably leaning towards option 3 at this stage of the game, with the idea to involve our newly appointed Public Arts Advisory Committee and have their input on this. I would also concur with some of the comments made to date in that I would seek to potentially limit the discussions involved in recommendation 3 such that it did not include consideration of an honorarium. I concur with those who have spoken that an honorarium is a difficult thing to implement in this case. I think I do concur that we've got lots of volunteers doing valuable work. I think it would be difficult to justify a specific honorarium for this position without debating its value.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would lean towards option 1, and I also agree no honorarium for the reasons already given. Although removing the requirement for the Arts Laureate to automatically serve as chair seems reasonable, I imagine that it wouldn't preclude this person from being chair. So if the group there chose to have this person as chair, that could still move forward. So I would stay with option 1. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Paterson, you're the only one who hasn't spoken yet. Do you have any comments on this?
Thank you, Mayor. I, like Councillor Appleton, am leading towards option number 3, excluding consideration of an honorarium. I would like to hear what the newly appointed PAC members have to, any knowledge that they have or any recommendations they would like to make to council. So I'm leaning towards option 3.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Paterson. I have hands back up for Braithwaite and then Zelka.
Thank you. I actually, I hear what everybody's saying about option 3, but then I look at the makeup of the new PAAC, and I think there's only 2 members who were on the PAAC prior. So I'm wondering what information we could really garner for them. So I'm happy to make a motion for option 1, but taking out the annual honorarium.
So that's moved. Is there a seconder for that? There's a seconder. Okay, so do you wish to motivate Councillor Braithwaite?
I think I kind of did already. I think that again, that I think it sounds like everyone's in agreement about the honorarium, or almost everyone's in agreement about the honorarium. I don't think that we should have something like that in for the Arts Laureate based on some of the things that have been said already. And again, I think that I would like to see this that Arts Laureates be advertised for very quickly. I think that we're lacking by not having an Arts Laureate right now, and I think this would expedite that. And I think we have enough information to go on for what we're actually looking for an Arts Laureate.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Other discussion on the motion? I'm not seeing any. It's. I'm just going to ask for a motion to extend to 10:15, just so we don't get. We have moved and seconded. This needs to be unanimous. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. So we're another 15 minutes or so just to wrap this up. I'm the only one who hasn't spoken. I'm reasonably supportive of option number one. I think. I mean, they've all got their merits and pros and cons. I agree that I think. Even if we were to consider an honorarium, we should definitely not refer that back to the PAC who might be selected for that position. But I'm very comfortable. I think it's a significant shift of policy for any volunteer position to be paid, and certainly all expenses are covered in that position and need to be. There shouldn't be anything out of pocket for the people involved. I am also mindful. I think Councillor Braithwaite made the point of timeliness, and I hadn't put as much weight on that, but I am largely swayed by that. I think we have a benefit here of moving things forward more quickly. For my clarification through to me, I guess to staff, Mr. Meikle, what the advertisement that would go out, because we've already determined that it should include a response that includes their vision for their term. What would that come back to council for consideration before it goes out, or what's the process considered at this point for that document?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe it could come back to council. I might refer to Ms. Williams on that. Might have a better sense of process on that, on advertising for this position.
You may not know Ms. Williams. I just wasn't sure if there was a clear intention on that or not. It doesn't sound like there is.
With respect to the wording of the ad, if that's what you're wanting to come back to council, staff could certainly draft an ad based on the previous resolution and bring that back at the same time that we're bringing the terms of reference, because those will also be amended and brought back to council for adoption prior to posting.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I have is the wording on the term, and seeking some clarification. And I think I'd like some input from council on this. To my mind, this is a rational position that it should be 4 years, and it should end at the midpoint of each council. So each council can have enough experience to then go out and make the call for the next Arts Laureate and consider the proposals that come in. So I don't know if the motion needs to reflect a specificity, because I think the terms of reference for the Arts Laureate should be 4 years, but I think in this case, it would end on December 31st, 2025, if that was the intention of the body. That was my memory of the conversations that had happened at this table, but I don't know for sure. So that's my 2 cents on the two pieces. Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll just get some clarification for Mr. Meikle. Does the specificity of the term need to be included in the motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm, again, not positive that it needs to be in the motion at this time. Certainly if we're bringing back the language for the posting, it could be included in that. I think our thoughts around the 2 to 3 year term, the 3-year term, I believe lands us where you had indicated, in roughly in the middle of the next cycle. So that is certainly possible and could be brought back with the language around the advertisement.
Okay, it would be in the terms of reference in any case, would it not, when it comes back?
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct.
Okay, that's a reasonable place to codify that then. Okay, thank you. That's my 2 cents on the motion that's on the floor then. Are there any other discussion on this motion? Okay, I will then, seeing no hands, I will call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Nay opposed? Thank you. And that moves that item forward then. So we look forward to those terms of reference coming back here. Item number 10.1 is the reserve bylaw. And I believe this is still subject to public input. So if people wish to call in, they can do so. We're just here for first three readings. So what I'll do is I'll take first and second reading, then we'll take some questions.
I'll move first and second readings of that bylaw, reserve bylaw number 4747/2020, amendment bylaw 4780/2021. Big first and second reading.
Moved and seconded. Okay, thank you. Now this is a chance to ask questions or have or comments are welcome at this point. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just wondering whether staff can clarify. Now, I understand that the proposal here is to separate the components of the reserve that specifically relate to parking and those that relate to transportation infrastructure. The substantive portion of the funds in this reserve relate to parking contributions that were made some years ago during redevelopment in the village. It's often referred to as a parking reserve or funds for parking. I'm just wondering whether staff can confirm that the funds that were collected at that time were specifically designated for the purposes of, I guess, subsection I of that purpose, that they were designated specifically for parking, and they did not, they were not more broadly assigned to a reserve under section 525 more generally.
Sure. Mr. Payne, if you're here, you're the one to answer this question.
Yes, Your Worship, I can confirm that is the case. The bylaw in question that dedicated those funds is the parking facilities bylaw, which specifically identifies those funds for off-street parking, for the provision of off-street parking.
So I have a quick follow-up, Your Worship, if I may.
Go ahead.
Through you to staff. There are two subsections as identified, the parking and the transportation infrastructure, that are possible for that type of reserve. Wondering whether staff could comment on what is council's capacity or what is council's jurisdiction to transfer funds or to reallocate funds from one subsection to another. Should it be concluded that the transportation infrastructure piece was prioritized, can those funds be reassigned in any way, or is there, or do those remain as per their original designation and there is no jurisdiction to change those?
Mr. Payne?
Your Worship, yeah, there are provisions under the community charter in which council can transfer funds from one capital reserve to another. Essentially, what would be required is for council to declare, by virtue of a bylaw, that the funds that were originally raised for an original intention are no longer needed for that intention. So there is a process involved there, certainly a bylaw that would need to be adopted, and subject, of course, to public input.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Zelka?
Thank you very much, Chair. I've been hearing for a couple of years from some of the business leaders in the community talking about this village parking reserve fund. So I appreciate the fact that it's been teased apart again. But I'm unclear where those funds came from. I've heard of property sales and I've heard of other heritage things and I've heard of bits and pieces, but it's very cloudy to me. So where did that $949,787 plus interest come from, please?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne, what is the source of that parking fund?
Your Worship, the principal amount in those funds were raised, again, pursuant to the parking facilities bylaw. That bylaw essentially relates to development. And if during the development process, the developer cannot provide the required number of parking on site, then they're required to submit funds in lieu for the provision of off-street parking. So As development has occurred over the decades, the district has collected those funds pursuant to that bylaw and has collected a lot of interest on it over the years as well.
Thank you.
A brief follow-up. Is the intention, remind me please, is the intention of that bylaw in collecting the funds is so that we would provide the parking, since it's not available on-site, we would provide it off-site or in the public lands? Is that what was I guess the theoretical intent, or maybe the explicit intent within the bylaw?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Payne?
Your worship, yeah, the parking facilities bylaw, I would assert that its intent is to ensure that there's adequate parking for the size of development. And if that parking can't be provided on site, then the municipality now has the option to go and purchase additional parking to make up for that shortfall. It's by no means a requirement for the district to do that, but the district has an option and the funds to do that as a result.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Any other questions, comments on this? If Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. Just to follow up on a comment that Director Payne just made, it is also true then, if I could get it confirmed, that the reason that the parking facilities subsection here and the transportation infrastructure components are linked together is such that a municipality may elect to invest in other types of transportation infrastructure in order to compensate for the lack of automobile parking, in the sense that there typically would be a certain amount of automobile parking provided, but this would provide for the incentivization of other transportation modes such that that number of automobile parking spots is not necessary.
Yeah, Mr. Payne, we're getting into the philosophy of this a little bit, but if you have any comments on that?
Yeah, Your Worship, the Local Government Act was amended to allow for us to use these funds that are collected for alternative transportation infrastructure. However, the council's intention to use those funds for that purpose would need to be specified in the bylaw that is used to collect those funds. So the parking facilities bylaw itself would have to specify that funds collected in lieu of parking can be used for alternative transportation infrastructure. Currently, it doesn't allow for that, and which is why the balance in the village parking reserve fund is much significantly higher than the alternative transportation infrastructure balance.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. Any other discussion? We have first and second reading on the floor. Ms. Williams, has there been any calls in on this item?
No, Your Worship, no callers.
I'm not sure we take public input on bylaws pieces anyway, but I'll just go with that. Any other discussion? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. No new business. Oh, sorry.
I'll do third.
Oh, sorry, third reading. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll do third reading of reserve bylaw 4747 2020 amendment bylaw number 4780 2021.
Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Thank you. Thank you for catching that, Councillor Braithwaite. Obviously, just the danger of going past 10 o'clock, my brain shuts off apparently automatically at the top of the hour. Any new business? Then just the last item on the agenda, this was again referred from an earlier meeting, just as a piece of correspondence from the District of Salish. Councillor Appleton, you wanted to just have a bit more of a discussion on this item than time allowed at that meeting. We're here tight again, but if we can, we'll try and address it tonight. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I will be brief. I would like, without delving into the details of the items that were covered at Sanish's council, not all of which are directly applicable to Oak Bay, I would like to, well, and I can make a motion to this effect, but I would like to see council not just receive the correspondence, but also direct you, your worship, to draft a response letter supporting Sanich's approach and indicating our council's support for their advocacy at the senior levels of government on this topic.
Okay.
If that was a motion, I
Second that, yeah.
Second.
Yeah.
If that's clear enough for members of council.
Do you have that written down? Can you just repeat it again so
Sure.
that staff have a chance to capture and we all hear it?
Thank you, Your Worship.
So you receive it and
receive the correspondence and to direct the mayor to issue a letter to Saanich Mayor and Council supporting the approach outlined in their correspondence and indicating Oak Bay Council's support for their advocacy with senior levels of government on this topic.
Perfect. As that was moved, is there a second? And there's a second. Think moved and seconded. I think that's pretty straightforward. Anything else you wish to add, Councillor Appleton?
No, thank you, Your Worship. I think that we as a council, I think, need to cast our minds to this topic. I know all members of council are highly aware of it. I think that we can often exist in a bit of a vacuum on this topic. Saanich is physically close to those areas that, where services are provided for people who are dealing with substance abuse issues. These are very present topics for them, less so for Oak Bay. So I think that in as much as this signaling of support is fairly minor in scope, limited in scope, I think it indicates that we as a council are aware of the regional nature of the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on that topic? No hands are popping up. I will then call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That passes. Thank you very much. And that brings us to
Move adjournment.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Need a hand? There we go. Hand has popped up. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? That passes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. That was a long discussion, but a worthy one. And we will see you all next Monday, 2 Mondays from now, I guess. March 29th for a special meeting.
Enjoy the rest of the week.
Yes. Thank you all, everybody.
Thank you all.